IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. I am back with you, ready to talk some Notre Dame football and a little bit about the Heisman Trophy. So that's what we're going to discuss today. Last couple days, I've been spending a lot of time kind of getting the next month or so, actually the next couple months, really plotted out of what we're going to discuss so we can make sure that we hit everything. And so today I'm going to talk about Notre Dame's freshman class, true freshman class, because why am I only talking about true freshmen and not redshirt freshmen? Because tomorrow, Vince and I are going to talk about the sophomore surge that could happen at Notre Dame this year, and we're going to talk about the sophomores that could have an impact, and those will be second-year players. So when we have these conversations, we will dive into guys, what guys are as far as their not their eligibility, but like what they are in school, how Notre Dame counts their roster. So we'll talk about that. Going to have a lot of fun this week. Going to talk about breakout players on Thursday. We're going to get to a mailbag on Friday. Then next week, we're going to talk about the schedule. We're going to do our 4-quarter breakdown. We're going to talk about All-American candidates. It's going to be a ton of fun. We have so much plotted out for these next couple months. It's going to be a lot of fun. Couple of things we're going to do. We're going to start this Thursday. Obviously, tomorrow, Wednesdays. Every Wednesday will still be our normal buy-sell hold at the end of our show. And then on Thursdays, we're going to start talking about some kind of national topics. And so for the first few Thursdays, we are going to dive into the Big Four conferences, and we will do our conference previews. And so we'll go through and make our predictions for who is going to, what the rankings are going to be in the leagues, and make our predictions for their top players, all that kind of stuff. Then we'll go into some national stuff. We'll do like a preseason All-American squad. We'll do our preseason IB top 25. And then as we get closer and closer to the season in August, we will then do our our season predictions. So we'll predict Notre Dame's record. We'll predict who we think the college football playoff teams will be and have some fun with it. And of course, we'll get into some bold predictions. But there's so much we're going to do in between then. A lot of fun. It was a lot of fun putting this schedule together. Looking at, okay, how are we going to break down the opponents? How are we going to get into who are the best offensive lines they're going to face. And so what we're going to do is going to be a little bit of fun is when we get into July, we're going to start our position previews for Notre Dame. And when we do that, and right now our first one is scheduled for Monday, July 15th. So we'll start quarterbacks, and then for the next 2 weeks, we'll do all of our position previews. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do our position preview for Notre Dame and go over all the things there. And then we'll talk about like the opponents. So we'll look at Notre Dame's quarterback situation, and then we'll go through the Notre Dame opponents and kind of talk about just overall who the top quarterbacks on the schedule are, who has the best quarterback room or the best running back room, and those type of things. And then at times we'll dive into obviously some other aspects of it, all opponent teams. We'll talk about the top 5 offenses on the schedule and all that other kind of stuff. So that will be a lot of fun. So that's all the kind of stuff we've got planned for the next 2 months. It is going to be jam-packed, locked in focus on Notre Dame and also the schedule. And then, of course, we'll get into some national stuff. So I'm looking forward to it. I hope you guys are looking forward to it. And hopefully today's topic can entertain you guys enough to where you actually focus on what we're talking about today, which will be a lot of fun. So we're going to talk about Notre Dame's freshman class today. And then after that, we'll get into Heisman Trophy contenders nationally. I'm going to go through kind of by conference. I'll talk to top quarterbacks, some position players, give you a couple sleepers. Then I'll talk about Notre Dame's quarterback or Heisman potential candidates. And then, of course, guys that are on Notre Dame's schedule that could potentially be Heisman candidates. And I don't see a lot, to be completely honest with you, and we'll dive into that. And then when we go freshman class, obviously we'll break that down offense and defense as well. So I hope you guys are ready to rock and roll, because I am certainly excited to talk about today's topics. So let's talk about freshman impact and the different categories that I'm going to dive into today. So I'm actually going to put everybody into a category. And so we'll kind of at least very briefly mention everyone, that all the true freshmen, scholarship freshmen this year. And there's going to really be 3 categories. And we'll talk offense first, and then we'll go defense. And the 3 categories are, number 1, guys that can make an immediate impact. So, instant impact. Now, instant impact doesn't mean you come in and you're Rocket Ismail right away, or you're Michael Floyd right away, or, or Aaron Lynch right away. It's guys that are either going to come in and be starters or potential key rotation players. So not just a guy that comes in and he plays 5-10 snaps a game, but a guy that has a chance to come in and be a really good two deep, count on that guy type of player. And it's one of those things where each guy is not necessarily a lock to do that, but guys that I believe have an opportunity to earn that type of role. Number two will be guys with legit rotation potential or guys with special teams opportunities. And rotation potential is more so they have a chance at some point to maybe be in the rotation, but guys that are a little bit further off or, maybe more limited in their snaps. So like I said earlier, the impact guys are not guys that are in the two deep, but maybe only play 5-10 snaps a game. They're guys that are just more regulars, like guys are going to play a lot more and be counted on a lot more. And then the last category is redshirts, guys that I think either will redshirt or would benefit from a redshirt. So those are the different categories that we're going to put everybody into. We'll go offense, then we'll go defense, and then, of course, we'll move on to our second topic. So when you look at the Notre Dame offense and you think about, the potential for an instant impact, the first place that you look at, in my opinion, is the wide receiver position. And there are two freshman players that I think have a chance to have an instant impact at Notre Dame. Even if it's not game one, guys are going to have a chance at some point in time this season to really be counted on players. And not necessarily because of injury, although injury will give them greater opportunities, but because of how good they are and the opportunities that's there for them to earn playing time. And we'll start off with Micah Gilbert. And obviously we'll get into Cam Williams next. And Cam Williams will be a guy that obviously came in with the higher ranking and the higher upside. And he still has that. That's still true. But Micah Gilbert showed up as a guy that in my opinion, is more physically ready to play as a freshman and physically ready in multiple ways. Micah's strong. He's got really good size. He's a little thicker than Cam is, but also physically includes the technical aspects of the game. Micah was a guy that really taught the game well, in my opinion. He's a guy that understands body positioning. He understands, finding soft spots in the zone, understands proper breaking points out of breaks and the different things that allow him to go out and get open. And he's a good athlete. He's not an elite athlete, but he's a good athlete. He's not a burner, but he has good enough speed to in the spring make plays. And those are all aspects that you need to come in as a freshman and really compete and push for playing time is you have to understand the game. Yes, guys that have elite skill sets can get in there, and we'll talk about that with the next guy. But the other thing is, have a big body and a guy that understands how to get open. And the one thing Micah Gilbert showed in the spring is he understands how to get open. And I'm not even talking about the blue gold game, because in the blue gold game, he beat Micah Bell on a double move. Micah kind of lost him. The second touchdown was against a walk-on. Okay, that's great, but it's good to see it. But I'm talking about what we saw from Micah in practices in the spring, in the Jersey scrimmage, and what we saw from him in more where he's going against better players. And so I think with his size, his physicality, his ball skills, which need to improve but show flashes of being very good. Micah's got very strong hands. What he has to learn is to play the ball better in contested situations. You'll see clips that Notre Dame sent out. We saw it at times where he's got the ability to do it. He can outplay a defensive back for the ball. But at other times when he competes for the ball, he drifts. We saw that in the blue gold game. Actually, it was the Jersey scrimmage, where balls were coming his way, and he's running vertical, and instead of going up for the ball, which does two things. Number one, it allows you to better position yourself for the football because you can see it better than the DB. But then also it puts you in a situation where if the DB doesn't play your jump properly, then he could maybe run through you, and if you don't catch the ball, you're drawing a pass interference. And there's times where we saw that from Micah, and there's other times where we saw him drift. And when you drift, you allow that DB to keep riding you away from the football, and it allows you to get vertical. So it's more so if you jump and drift, that DB is going to be here. He gets his hands up. You're not above him. You haven't high-pointed the football, and it makes it harder for you to make the catch. And we saw that from Micah in the Jersey scrimmage where he did drift too much and the ball didn't get his way. But we've seen other instances where he was more vertical in how he attacked the ball and he made plays. So the skill's there. It's just about consistency. And that's going to be a key for Micah is use your spring growth and the opportunities you got to really take another jump in the fall. And with his size, I think he has a chance to do that. Now, this fall is going to be a little tougher for him because for a couple reasons. Number one, you have a healthy Jaden Thomas, hopefully, knock on wood. Jaden Thomas is back in the fall and is healthy and can stay healthy. And if he is, Jaden's an immediate, rotation guy at the very least in the boundary, if not the starter and likely the starter. And you'll have Bo Collins arriving this summer, and he'll obviously be there in fall camp. Now, Bo's a guy that could play boundary. Bo could play field. Bo could play a little bit of slot. So he can play all over, but certainly he'll get an opportunity to play in the boundary. And then, of course, Deion Colzie. And what to expect from Deion Colzie. I mean, he's a guy that we all know. We've talked about it a lot. If the potential's there for him to be a difference maker, he's just got to put it all together. So it's going to be a challenge for Micah to go into August 31st in the same place where he ended the spring, which was the number one boundary. He was the number one boundary because Bo Collins wasn't there and because Jaden Thomas was banged up a lot of the spring. Now, so there's a lot more work to do, but I still believe Micah Gilbert's a player that has an opportunity to absolutely not only crack the two deep, but be a guy that plays. And I'll say this, he's a better football player at this stage of his career than what Rico Flores was at this stage of his career as a freshman last year. That's no shot on Rico. Rico did a nice job at Notre Dame last season, but Micah is more advanced. He's bigger. I believe he's faster. He's route running is similar. He's stronger. He can compete for the football more effectively. So we saw what Rico did last year. If Micah has a chance to be that kind of production, he has a chance to be a 25, 30 catch guy as a freshman. I don't know that he's going to get there because it's a very deep position group, but the opportunity is certainly there. And that's why Micah Gilbert is a guy that is in this potential for an instant impact. The other receiver to talk about is obviously Cam Williams. And Cam is sort of the opposite of Micah Gilbert. Cam and Micah both have good height and length, which is good. And Cam's, to me, appears to be a little taller than Micah. Not by a whole lot, and it could be the hair. It may be that, but he just appears like when I see them next to each other, he appears just slightly taller. Very long athlete, and Cam is an explosive athlete as well. Like you can see it on film or on the field. We know it was on film, but when we got into the spring, you'd see Cam kind of come off during drills, and he was just a little choppy and not quite sure of what he was doing. So he didn't really explode off the ball. He wasn't like super quick getting in and out of his cuts. And he wasn't always real comfortable with what he was doing with his press release. And the reason why is because of how he was used in high school. And this is not at all a knock on his high school coaches, because as I've said that before, their job is to, obviously develop him as a young man, but their job is how they use him is to help him, be the best player he can be for what they need him to do to win football games. And so with Cam, he had to do a little bit of everything. He was playing receiver. He was running vertical routes. He was running a lot of screen game. He was getting reverses. They'd line him up as a wildcat quarterback at times. He played defense and being spread so thin, which was smart to do. If I was the head coach at Cam's high school, I would have said, hey, this is what we're doing. I would have used him in a very similar fashion to how his high school coaches used him. However, it's a situation where that didn't necessarily prepare him as much for making an immediate impact at Notre Dame as how Micah Gilbert was used at Charlotte Catholic. Or Charlotte Christian, excuse me. So that's something to consider when it looks at Cam. And so we saw that this spring. We saw Cam at times hesitant, not sure of what he was doing, not sure how to win at the line, not sure how to properly get into and out of his top ends with the most efficiency and quickness. And it made him a little bit easier to cover. However, there were times when we would see Cam in practice and he just was like, I'm just going to go. And he either A, knew what he was doing and was comfortable with the call and the technique, or B, he just said, I'm just going to go. And I can't always tell that the route he ran in practice was correct because I don't know the call. And I can only know that if the quarterback or the head coach or somebody like that is able to correct him when we see that, which, I can't always tell. But When Cam got off coverage, or when Cam was working in the slot in sort of a twin set and was working an inside vertical route against off zone coverage, you guys saw the 5-star ability. You saw the speed. I mean, he would just explode off the football. We saw that in the Jersey scrimmage. He just torched Chance Tucker on a post route for a touchdown. And it wasn't even a good route. It was just vertical post. But he was so fast and explosive out of it, and he ran it with such confidence that he was able to get open by several yards. And, of course, C.J. Carr hit him right in the chest, and it was a touchdown. I mean, so you could see that ability from Cam. You'd see him run seam routes against, like, they'd run vertical concepts, and the receivers are all vertical, and Cam's like 2-3 yards ahead of all the other receivers because he just got vertical so fast. And he's a pretty strong athlete. I mean, Cam's built well. So more actually, he's better built than I thought he was going to be. He's a little thicker than I thought he was going to be. He's a legit 200 pounds now at Notre Dame. I thought he'd come in like 190-ish, 193, and be muscular but be a little skinny. He's muscular, but he's a little bit broader shouldered than I thought he was going to be, and has a potential to be a 215-pound kid. So there's a lot to like about what Cam Williams does. He just has to learn the position and learn how to play. Well, that's why the spring was so important for him. Is yes, he struggled, but for a kid like Cam, to me, struggling is good. It's a good thing for him to struggle because he realizes, like, listen, yes, I'm a great athlete. And I'm got size and hands and speed and all that, but I've got to learn how to play the game. And I can't just go out there and out athlete Benjamin Morrison and Christian Gray. I've got to have some technical aspects of my game as well. And he saw that, and he saw that firsthand during the spring. Well, now he gets all of the summer, all of June, all of July. Fall camp starts on July 31st and all of August. So he's got 2.5 whole months now moving forward where he can really work on refining those things. And if he can refine those things and focus on being a more technical player. And again, he doesn't have to look like Cooper Kupp in day one. It continue to enhance and improve those things so that you can play faster. And some of the telegraph nature of how Cam runs routes right now can be worked out. And if he can do that, then Cam is going to be a difference maker this season. He is going to be a guy that could be a 30 catch plus guy, averaged 18 to 20 plus yards per catch. And essentially do for Notre Dame's offense this year what Tobias Merriweather did for the offense last year, but on a more productive basis. So if you look at what Tobias did for the offense last year, he was really only used in kind of one way. He was a guy that ran vertical routes, and he was a guy that ran post routes, and he's a guy that ran over routes. That's really all that they used Tobias Merriweather to do last year. And so when he caught the ball, it was for impact. So he only caught 14 passes, but he had 284 yards, and he averaged 20.3 yards per catch. I could see Cam Williams being that type of 20-plus yards per catch and be that go route, post route, over route where you're using your speed to make plays. And so he may not be like the volume guy that maybe Micah Gilbert could be, or that Chris Mitchell or Jaden Greathouse or Jaden Thomas will be. But I could easily see Cam walking into a situation where he catches minimum 15 to 20 balls, averages 20 yards per catch, and is an impact player for Notre Dame. So I certainly think that Cam is not only capable of that, but I'd be a little disappointed if that doesn't happen at some point in time. The reason it may not happen is, number one, great depth. You've got Chris Mitchell at his position. You've got KK Smith. You've in the slot. You've got Jaden Greathouse and Jordan Faison and Jaden Harrison. And then you've got all the boundaries that I just mentioned and guys along those lines. So, there's a lot of things to look at with Cam and say, hey, like, it's going to be tough sledding. Whereas last year, Cam would have had a chance to be Notre Dame's best receiver by the end of the year. I mean, when you look at all the injuries and things that happened, if Cam was here a year ago, he plays a lot of football, might even be Notre Dame's best, most productive receiver, just based on the opportunities that would have been there and the skill set that he has. And so he'll have that shot this year. Now that he's got a coach that's a better technical teacher, I think that puts Cam in position to really make a difference for Notre Dame this year. I have one more offensive player in my potential impact, instant impact category, and that's Gerby Lambert. And he obviously he could be in really all three categories, depending on how his development goes. So far, we've heard good things, but I don't really put a lot of stock into, what a guy does, like an offensive lineman does, like his first week on campus. It's one of those things where you're really not going to know what an offensive lineman can do till the pads come on. What you can learn early on is, okay, what kind of physique does he have? What position is he in regard to conditioning, what, work ethic, all those type of things. And those are important. And we're going to find that out about Gerby over the next, 2 weeks left in June. And then, of course, throughout the month of July. But the talent is there and the opportunity is there for him. You've got two guys battling a right tackle, and Tosh Baker, who's a fifth-year senior, and Emil Wagner, who's a redshirt sophomore. And they both have ability to varying degrees. Tosh is much further along than Emil was in the fall and in the spring from a knowing your assignment standpoint and a technical standpoint. And certainly he's got a lot more weight than Emil. Emil has, to me, has he's the better athlete. He's got more natural power than Tosh does, even with less weight, but obviously far behind in regard to knowing your assignments and being technically proficient. And of course, there's a need for him to continue to be able to play with more size, not necessarily add a lot more size, but to whatever size he has, to use that to be a more forceful player. So it's not going to be easy for Gerby Lambert to step into this type of situation, but he's that good. And I could see a scenario where maybe it's not at the end of fall camp, but if the right tackle position struggles at all, I think Notre Dame has to strongly consider, do we just go with the talented young kid? And here's why I say that. I'm not one of those people that believes as a football coach, you just play the most talented player all the time. That's a very simplistic thing to say. And sometimes in the past, when I've talked about you need to play freshmen, I think some people take it as, well, it's just you always play the more talented guy. And that's not always true. What I have said is if it's close, if the development and the technical aspects and the overall level of play is close, you go with the more talented guy. I've said that about the offensive line. If one guy is way ahead of another guy, let's compare, like, let's say Pat Coogan to a Sullivan Absher, just for argument's sake. Well, I think we can all agree, and I think Pat would probably agree, and the O-line coach would probably agree, and the head football coach would probably agree, that from a pure God-given ability standpoint, Pat Coogan is not as good as Sullivan Absher, for example. Sullivan Absher's bigger. He's more athletic, in my opinion. He's more powerful. He's got way higher ceiling. So, but if you took, let's say, like every 10 plays, Pat doesn't have any, double pluses. So when I would grade offensive linemen, it's like, you just kind of get a plus. You did your job, right? And did your job isn't just you got a body on a guy, but you did your job and you got the movement we need and you did your job. You knew your assignment. You used good technique. You executed the job to the standard that I expect for an offensive lineman. That's a plus. You get a minus if you don't, didn't take proper footwork, maybe hit a guy and stalemated when on inside zone. I don't want you stalemating. That's a loss. Double minus is you got just whooped and it resulted in some sort of a hurry, a hit on the quarterback, a tackle for loss, a stuff in the run game. Those are double minuses. And then a double plus is you have a dominant block. You just come off the line and you just drive a guy, 5 yards off the ball and just blow him up. You think of the block that Rocco Spindler had again on Donovan Heinisch in the blue gold game. That's a double plus. And so, if Pat's coming out in every 10 plays, Pat's got 8 pluses just doing his job and 2 minuses, no double minuses, no double pluses. Sullivan comes out and he's got like two double pluses. He's got 3 pluses, let's say 4 pluses, and then 2 minuses, and then 1 double minus. Or let's say it's 1 minus and 2 double minuses, or 2 minuses and 2 double minuses, however you want to get it. So 6 or 7, some sort of you did your job, and then 4 not did your jobs. But the goods were really good, but the bads were tackle for loss, hit on the quarterback. In that type of breakdown, you're going to go with Pat Coogan because there's a big difference in execution of your assignment. And for an offensive lineman, that's very important. But let's say it's a situation where, for every 10 snaps, Pat's got 7 pluses and 2 minuses and 1 double minus because he just athletically can't do the job. And then you come out where Sullivan now has, let's say, 2 double pluses, 4 pluses, 3 minuses and 1 double minus. Now all of a sudden it's a little bit closer. Pat still grades higher on execution, but only by 1 snap in every 10. And, they both had 1 really bad one, but Sullivan, his top 2 blocks were just way better than Pat's. Now it's close. Now it's a situation where you may say, you know what? Let's go with the younger guy because it's already close. And with that extra experience, he's going to then develop, and those double minuses become just minuses. And some of those just normal minuses become pluses. And then some of those pluses are going to become double pluses. You see what I'm saying? So it's close. And so you go with the more talented player and say, okay, we're going to let him learn. And there may be some things that you would need to do as an offensive coach to say, hey, we're going to do some things to protect him in certain pass pro. You're playing Texas A&M or you're playing Florida State, or you're playing a team like that, and they got a real dynamic pass rusher. You may say, hey, look, we know where that guy's going to be. We may chip him a little bit. We may move the pocket on him. We're going to do some things to try to slow him down. So that way our freshman's not left on an island in that situation, or our redshirt freshman's not in that situation. So there's certainly some things you can do to protect a younger player in that situation, but you give him that opportunity to go out there and play and learn and get better because it's close. If it's not close, you go with the veteran player. Well, that's kind of where the situation where I could see Gerby being in at some point in time this season, because as much as I like Tosh as a player, and if he could be a more consistent guy, I think he could do a solid job. Like, I believe Tosh Baker this season has a chance to be a solid football player for Notre Dame. Just like a Josh Lugg, do your job, nothing special, nothing bad, just do your job, don't get us in trouble kind of guy. I could see that. He's not there yet, but I think he could be that. He showed, he did that for the most part in the bowl game where he had a couple rough snaps, but overall was solid, nothing special, just solid. And then Emil's a talented player that has a chance to be solid and impactful at times, and we saw that in the blue gold game where Emil didn't do anything special and didn't flash that big time talent, but for the first time that I've ever seen him in a Notre Dame uniform, he just did his job. That's a great sign because eventually as Emil gets more experience, those do your jobs are going to turn into moving people and having more dominant plays. So that's good. But then you have a guy like Gerby, who is already bigger than Emil, who's got a lot of just elite length, like 30-plus inch arms, like well over 34-plus inch arms from what I'm told. Tremendous wingspan, athletic, very strong hands. He's just raw. And because he played in an offense and didn't throw the ball a whole lot, I don't know how good of a pass protector he's going to be. But the talent is just enormous. And the potential is just extremely high to where if you're not getting good play from the right tackles, if they're getting beat and giving up sacks or pressures and tackles for loss and not playing well, you might as well go with the guy with way more talent. And I could see a scenario where that happens this year. I kind of hope it doesn't happen because that means there's going to be a period where, there's going to be some struggles, but you have to love the talent. And when you have a guy like Gerby, and to answer a question in the chat, who, is around 6'6" plus, a guy that's going to be showing up around 300 pounds, most likely, if not a little bigger by the time we get to fall camp, incredibly long arms, very broad shoulders, and a guy with a lot of power, a guy like that can make some early noise. And I would argue that Gerby is more advanced technically than what Charles Jagasaw was a year ago. So I would even give him that. And the other thing, too, is Gerby's going to play right tackle, where Charles was sort of still in the process of transitioning to left tackle. He was a right tackle his first few years of high school, moved to left tackle as a senior, did a great job, earned 5-star grade from us, or a 5-star grade from On3. But he was a guy that we all knew, like, technically he needs a lot of work. Gerby has that as well in the pass game because they don't do it a lot. But run game wise, he's to me further along technically that regard, and then a little bit in the pass game. We've seen what little bit we've seen. He's got that kind of ability where he can kind of step in and be an impact freshman. And question that was kind of posed in the chat regarding Gerby and how he stacks up is how does he stack up to guys like Blake Fisher, maybe a Joe Alt. To me, Gerby would probably be more in the Joe Alt category than Blake Fisher because Blake had a whole spring to get himself to work out some of the kinks. Blake was like 320 plus as a freshman. And so Blake came from a system too where he pass blocked a lot more than what we've seen from Gerby Lambert, and certainly what we saw from Charles Jagusah. So he had that, and that 15 practice head start certainly helped. And then being there obviously all summer. Athletically, Gerby is ahead of Blake Fisher, just like Joe Alt was. But is he still developing his frame a little bit? Is he still learning certain things? Joe was still making the transition offensive tackle. Joe was a guy that had played tight end in high school. He had done some pass pro, certainly had worked with his dad in pass pro, but was a guy that was really making the transition to tackle. And so that's why you had Blake Fisher kind of beat him out early on, and why they went to Michael Carmody next when Blake got hurt, and why they went to Tosh Baker next when Michael Carmody got hurt, and then eventually went to Joe because Joe needed a little bit more time. But once the light went on, Joe was like, all right, he's the dude. And they kind of started to see that in 2021 because they were putting him in at tight end and some things like that. And honestly, I would not be opposed to Notre Dame doing that. If they think Gerby has a chance to go out this season and maybe be the guy and earn that job to where maybe by the middle of the season he's that guy, I would not be at all opposed in short yardage and goal line situations letting him come in and be your sixth offensive lineman. I have no problem with that if they think he's going to be that guy. And the reason I say that is I just don't see, when I look at it, it's kind of like Charles Jagusah. It's great. You redshirted him last year. It's wonderful. If Charles Jagusah is the player we think he's going to be, he's not going to be a 5-year player. You're not going to benefit from that red shirt, in my opinion. If Gerby Lambert's the player that I think he is, the odds are not good that he's going to be here 5 years, which is, I mean, that's not, say the odds are not good. I don't think that's a bad thing. It's like I've said about Benjamin Morrison. People say, well, I hope Benjamin comes back for senior year. I don't want him to come back at all. And the reason I don't want him to come back is because if Benjamin comes back, it means he either A, was injured a lot, or B, didn't have a very good junior season. I want Benjamin to go out there and be a star, be a healthy, be an All-American, be a great player on what we hope is a Notre Dame team that can make a deep run and then leave as a junior. When I look at a guy like Gerby Lambert and I look at guys like Charles Jagusah, they're more like Quentin Nelson than they are Micah McGlinchey and Liam Meikerberg and guys like that. And what I mean by that is, Quentin needed a year to adjust. He needed a year to kind of get ready to play. Now, when Quentin was a freshman, they didn't have the current freshman rule of you can play 4 games. If you played a snap, you were done, barring injury. Because you play a couple games and get hurt. You play the first couple games, get hurt, then you could redshirt. But so Quentin didn't play as a true freshman. He needed a little bit more time, reshape his body, learn technique, learn how to go through and handle being a college football player and just how to, just learning all those little things from Coach Easton, which most linemen needed to do. But then as a redshirt freshman, he took off. And like once we saw Q in 2015, we all knew that guy ain't going to be here for 5 years. So the red shirt was kind of useless, to be honest with you. I'm not saying they shouldn't have redshirted him at the time. That was the data you had, and you had, veteran offensive line. But when you came out, it was like, okay, that guy's not going to be a 5-year player. With McGlinchey, he had a chance to be a 5-year guy. Needed to be a 5-year guy. Liam Meikerberg needed to be a 5-year guy. Once the light went on with those guys who have superior athleticism and strength, you're like, yeah, that guy's not going to be a 5-year player. Aaron Banks is not going to be a 5-year player. Once the light went on, really like late in 2018, or it'd be 2019. Once that light went on for Aaron, you kind of like, yeah, he's got a chance to be out of here after next year. And so you see guys like that. Well, that's how I think Gerby is. I don't think Gerby's a 5-year player. So if you just burn his red shirt playing, as the 6th offensive lineman that occasionally and then plays in mop-up duty, fine. I'm okay with that. Because if he's a 5th-year player, it means he got hurt. Or he's not that good. And in that situation, you could use the medical red shirt, or B, You may not need him here because if he's not good enough to be gone by his 4th year, he may not be a starter for you. So when I look at Gerby Lambert, I'm saying, hey, play him as a rookie. So if they can maybe find a role for him early on, like they did Joe Alt in 2021, where the light starts to go on, you're like, okay, we gotta do something with this kid. Let's get him in some blocking situations. That was also partly out of need because of the depth of the tight end room or lack of depth in the tight end room. But it was also just about, hey, we got a kid that's got a skill set that can help us. And I would do that with Gerby. I would, because I think he's a guy that you have to say, hey, look, we got to give him a chance to get more comfortable. And last year, I wouldn't have done that with Charles, even though I didn't think Charles was a 5-year player, but Charles was a lot less advanced technically. But you also had 2 NFL players at the tackle spots. You don't have that at both tackle spots now. You have it at 1 with Charles, but you don't have that at right tackle. And so I would give Gerby more chances this year to play than I would have given Charles last year, because the opportunity is different for Gerby than it is Charles. And so that's why I have him as my instant impact player for the Notre Dame offensive class for 2024 season. Let's move on to the next category. And these are guys that I believe have opportunities to really earn key rotation spots or spots on special teams. And the special teams opportunities are a little less for offensive players outside of returners, but the opportunity is there. First 2 guys I want to talk about, because I'm going to save the next guy, the other guy, last, because I want to talk about these 2 guys. And it's Kedron Young and Aeneas Williams. And look, we're always going to put those 2 guys together because they came in together and they can play together because they have different skill sets. But both of those players, to me, are going to have an opportunity this season to earn rotation role and then also special teams opportunities. And when by rotation role, I mean guys that if there's a fault, somebody falters ahead of them, if somebody gets injured, they're going to step in and play. Now, I think their opportunity to play increased greatly when Jabron Payne got hurt. And I'm not happy about that because I didn't want Jabron to get hurt. But, hey, that's part of football. And so what happens next? Well, what happens next is you have these 2 kids that are very talented that have an opportunity to come in and compete right now for that number 3 job. So Devin Ford's a nice player. He's a veteran player. He's going to get a benefit of the doubt when it comes to can you put somebody in there that knows what they're doing in a non-carrying the football situation? Sure. And so, like, if you were to say, well, who's your third down back going to be? Well, if it's not Jadarian, then it might right now I'd probably say Devin Ford because he can pass block and he can catch the ball in the backfield. I think both Kedron and Aeneas have a chance to earn that role. Now, I don't know that both of them are going to get that shot this year, barring injury, but I think both of them are going to have the talent to step in right away and say, I got this number 3 job and I can handle this. And they bring different elements to the table. Kedron's a 230-pound back that can hit home runs, that's got physicality as a runner, got great feet. Didn't do a lot of pass blocking in high school, nor did he do a lot of pass catching. But if I'm, Coach McCullough, I'm going to really focus. Well, I shouldn't say I'm Coach McCullough because, of course, he's going to do that. If I'm Kedron Young, one thing that I'm going to take great pride in from day 1 of fall camp is proving that I can handle pass pro. That is going to be Kedron's fastest path to the field, that I can come in there and be a forceful blocker. And the reason I say that is because if he can come in and be a forceful blocker, that's going to then open up other opportunities for them to say, hey, look, we got this guy that can really be a hammer in pass pro. He's 230 pounds. He's going to step up and just wham, right, bring that punishment. Okay, well, that's great, and we'll use him there. And the other thing about Kedron is Kedron catches the ball well. He didn't do it a lot in high school, and it was kind of a question mark. I remember in December, was it December, January, whenever the All-American Bowl was, Ryan sent me some clips. He was down there, and he sent me some clips from practice of Kedron running routes and catching the ball. And I'm like, this cat can catch the football. And then we saw it a little bit in the spring as well, where like he doesn't look like a guy that can catch the ball out of the backfield, and he hardly ever did it in high school. But then you see him doing like, this kid's got hands. He can catch the football. And so that's also adds to that third down value. Because if you have a third down guy that's only a pass blocker, I don't know that gives you the ultimate value that you want and need. There has to be a level of, okay, nobody comes. Can he get out and catch the football? Or, one thing you want to be able to do on third down, against teams that bring a lot of pressure is you want to have the potential to free release and beat them with leverage. So if you know a team's going to bring, pressure off the backside edge, you want to have on 3rd and 2, it'd be nice to have a situation where you have a running back that can maybe do something against that. If you're in 3rd down and they're going to play some sort of man protection and you think you can pick it up, but they're not necessarily a blitz team, or you think that they're a zone team that says, hey, look, they're not going to bring those extra pressure guys. And so we need to have a running back that we can kind of free release. If they're only rushing 4 and then you just sit your running back in there to just pass pro, nobody comes. Now you've got 6 guys in protection plus your quarterback. You only have 4 guys running routes against 7. But if you have a running back that's a legitimate pass game weapon, he's dangerous on checkdowns, and Kedron can be dangerous on checkdowns. He's athletic, he's got really good feet, really good contact balance, and he can make big plays. So he's not some lumbering player. He can take a 3rd down and 5, catch the ball at 2 yards and make people miss or run people over and pick up the 1st down. And he's got the hands to do it. Or, if I want to do a free release situation and they've got a middle line or a will linebacker that's not a great athlete and they're going to drop in coverage, I want to run some choice routes out of the backfield. I want to run some angle routes. I want to run some slide, some slant slide concepts into the boundary to maybe isolate that weak side flat defender or get him in some coverage against that will linebacker situations and be able to hurt him. So it can't just be pass pro. The good news is I think Kedron has the ability to catch the ball. I don't doubt that. It's the pass pro part that he's got to prove. And then if he can prove that, then you're going to be more willing to use him in other situations. And I could see a scenario where, either Jadarian or Kedron is your goal line back the way that Jabron Payne was at times last year. And so I could certainly see a scenario where that happens with Kedron Young. But if he can't handle 3rd down and he can only carry the football, then now your odds of getting on the field are a little less, or a lot, not a lot, but a little bit harder. Because, you can run the ball. Well, so can Jeremiah, and so can Jadarian, and so can Aeneas. I think Kedron's got to show that, hey, he can do a little something different than just run the football. And if he does that, I'll be shocked if he doesn't play. He's got to stay healthy. But if he can do that, I'll be shocked if Kedron's not on the field. And then Aeneas is another guy that I think has a chance to earn that job as well. And what Aeneas showed is he doesn't always have the size that Kedron has, but he's a tough kid. He's got good size. He's over 200 pounds. He's a really good athlete. Good speed, not great speed, but good speed, enough speed. And he's got very good hands out of the backfield. So he really presents some interesting 3rd down opportunities as well. He's not as big as Kedron is, but he's a tough kid. And if you tell Kyron Williams, hey, man, I need you to become a great blocker, I have a feeling Kyron's going to do what you need to do, or Aeneas is going to do what you need to do to go out there and say, oh, look, coach, if this is what you tell me I got to do on the field, I'm going to go do it. I mean, that's how Aeneas Williams strikes me. He just strikes me as the kind of kid that you say, hey, man, I really need you this year. If you're going to play for us, your job is going to be this niche, and I need you to get good at that. I don't know about you guys, but Aeneas Williams strikes me as the kind of guy that's going to go out there and say, all right, cool, I'm going to do that because I want to go on the field and help this team any way I can. And then also he can carry the football and do some of those kind of things. So a lot of stuff that I said about Kedron is also true for Aeneas in the standpoint of, like, if you can earn that 3rd down role, be good in pass pro, he adds a lot of value in the pass game. So in those situations I talked about where you maybe want to get 5 out on a 3rd down situation, that's a legit weapon out of the backfield and as a pass catcher. And so he gives you a lot of that. And then also, God forbid something happened to Jeremiah Love at receiver, you don't have to completely abandon your running, but not a receiver, but like when he's like lining up outside, you don't have to completely abandon that if you don't want to, because Aeneas Williams can bring some of that value as well. So I love the depth that these guys provide, and I'll be a little surprised if they don't make an impact this year. And then with Aeneas, I could also see Aeneas potentially, having an opportunity this year as a kick returner should Jaden Harrison get injured, because we saw him show some abilities at kick return in the spring. And of course, he was a very dynamic kick returner in high school. I mean, this is a kid that had, I think it was like 150 touchdowns in high school. This is a kid that had over 4,000 yards rushing and over 3,000 yards receiving. I don't care what level of competition you play. That's outstanding. And so he's just not a sexy player, which is why he gets overlooked a lot. And we didn't have him as a top 100 guy, but he's a borderline top 100 guy. And I think Kedron Young's a better prospect overall. But that's only that doesn't mean Aeneas isn't really good. He is. It's just I think this guy's slightly better. But I think Aeneas is a little bit more versatile which could lead him to potentially being that guy that gets that opportunity. And Aeneas is the kind of guy that if he gets that opportunity, he's not going to give it back. He's not. He's going to go out there and say, "This is mine now," and this is the way that it is now. Okay, and so I think those two kids have a chance to certainly be key rotation guys or special teams players for Notre Dame in 2024. Last guy that I have on offense in this category, CJ Carr. Now, obviously, CJ could be a redshirt guy. I personally just don't view CJ Carr as a redshirt player. That's my opinion. That's not intel I got from anybody else. No one's told me, oh, he's going to play, he's going to do this. I'm just telling you what I think. And what I think is when you look at CJ Carr and you think about the fact that in the spring, he looked more comfortable going through progressions than your top two quarterbacks that were healthy, who are both older, is not a good sign for those players if they want to hold CJ Carr off. Now, the reality is, and this has been said to us, is a lot of what CJ did in those two spring performances were against 13 players. It's very true. And so to me, it's like, well, what that means to me is, okay, maybe the pass rushes wasn't there as much, although I think you could debate that. You could argue also that the openings were a little bigger for receivers. That's true. But to me, that has nothing to do with, okay, can he go through his progressions and get to the number 3 receiver? Can he go through his progressions and get to the backside dig? Can he go through his progressions and get to the backside go or the backside post or the backside comeback and not just throw blind backside? The fact that he showed that is a great sign. Now the conversation comes into scenarios where you look at it and say, okay, well, is that enough? Can he do enough to earn the trust of the coaches that if Riley Leonard goes down, he's the guy they turn to? If you were to ask me today, who's the backup quarterback at Notre Dame, I'd say Steve Angeli. If you were to ask me that if Riley Leonard goes down and they need a quarterback for a long period of time, who do I think will get that role? I think it's CJ Carr. I do. And so he's a guy that if he can build on what he did in the spring, look, I'll tell you this, like I've talked to enough people around the program to feel like, yeah, like there's a difference with CJ than the other quarterbacks. And that's with all due respect. There's just something a little different with that kid. How the ball comes out of his hand, how he commands the huddle, how he, communicates away from the field, where he can put the ball, how he goes through progressions, his ability to absorb information and then take it to the football field. It's just different. It's just different. And that's who he is. And so I just have a hard time. I have a hard time seeing that by the end of the year, CJ's not that guy. I have a hard time believing that by the time we get to next spring, it's going to be kind of obvious who the quarterback is going to be to replace Riley Leonard. And I think it's going to be CJ Carr. And I think that's going to give him a chance this season to earn that number 2 spot on the team. And I don't know that I would waste time redshirting him. I just don't. I don't see CJ Carr being a 5-year player. In no universe do I think redshirt senior, 5th-year senior CJ Carr, barring dramatic injury, is going to be better than senior Deuce Knight or even junior Noah Grubbs. And not that I'm saying those guys are better prospects, but what I'm saying is if CJ's not good enough to leave as a senior, a true senior, then that means he's not the guy that we thought he was, and he'll get beat out by younger, more talented quarterbacks. So I don't see the point in redshirting CJ. And then the final reason I wouldn't is because I just think he's too good. I think he's too good to not groom to be that next guy. I just think he's going to earn it. And I don't think you give it to him. He's got to earn it. Because if you start handing him things before as a freshman, then he's just going to kind of, I don't care how mature you are, when you start just being given things, then you start to kind of accept and expect those things. You got to make him earn it. But I think CJ, and I think that they will. There's no doubt they're going to make him earn it because I've talked to people in Notre Dame who love Kenny Minchie, and obviously everybody loves Steve Angeli for all the intangibles he brings to the table. But it's just there's just something different with this kid, and I think if given the opportunity, he's going to take advantage and be that guy. So that's my breakdown of that group. The redshirt players, it's Logan Saldate is a guy that I think will get a redshirt this year. And honestly, the main reason why is because of the numbers and because he wasn't an early enrollee. I think Logan Saldate is a good football player, and I like that pickup. But it's just such a deep depth chart, and there's so many guys that just have more experience in the system, experience in Notre Dame, and all those type of things. I just think it's going to be a little harder for him to come in to Notre Dame this year and really earn that spot. So I think he's a redshirt guy. Jack Larson's I have it right now as a redshirt player. If there's another injury at tight end, I think Jack can come in and help this season. I do. But as of right now, pre-injury, I'm going with him as a guy that will be a redshirt. And then the other three offensive linemen, Styles Prescott, Peter Jones, and Anthony Knapp are also all redshirt guys for me. So that's how I see the offensive class. So instant impact, Micah Gilbert, Cam Williams, Gerby Lambert. Potential for rotation or special teams, CJ Carr, Keedron Young, Aeneas Williams. And then my redshirt players are Logan Saldate, Jack Larson, Styles Prescott, Peter Jones, and Anthony Knapp. So that's going to be it for the offensive group. I'm going to do the defensive group next. But before we do, y'all know what to do. Hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed to our channel. And if you're listening via podcast platform with any of our podcast partners, Spotify, Apple, whoever, make sure you give us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate that. And sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. We've had, I think, looking at my notes, we've had 3 people in the last several days sign up for the booster clubs, which we greatly, greatly appreciate. Actually, let me just pull that up here real quick. So in the last week, we have had, so let me get down here. I've got all my members here. We got 4 people in the last 4 days have signed up for booster club. So we greatly appreciate that. Obviously, if you sign up for the booster club, you get some free IB merch. You get an IB club mug. If you sign up for the Shamrock or Blue Club, and if you sign up for the Gold Club, you not only get the IB club mug, you also get an IB Gold Club t-shirts. Those are items that don't go to anyone else. You can't buy them. I don't have them. Vince doesn't have them. Angela doesn't have them. Those are for IB club members, and we certainly appreciate those folks for what they do. And you can find all that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, let's talk a little defense. The Notre Dame defensive class is very interesting because it's a pretty good defensive class, and there's no doubt about it. But they're also walking into a situation where you've got a pretty loaded depth chart coming back. You've got a lot of defensive linemen coming back, a lot of veterans stepping into roles. You've got your linebacker class was really good. They followed up another really good linebacker class, which makes it a little bit more challenging. You've got a really good corner class coming in who follow two pretty good corner classes, and you see kind of where it's going. So it's going to be difficult for a lot of the freshman defensive players to earn significant playing time as rookies without there being injuries. Having said that, I do believe the freshman class will make an impact on defense this year. And so, we'll do instant impact players. We'll do guys that have key rotational roles, and then we'll have guys who are going to be red shirts. And so let's kick things off. Obviously talking about the instant impact players, and I have 2. I believe that there could be a third if there are injuries. But as of now, barring something that's unforeseen, I have 2 guys, and I'm going to start off up front, and that's with Bryce Young. Now, technically, Bryce Young right now is 3rd string on the depth chart, right? That's the reality. But he's going to play. And I love the big end position. Notre Dame just calls it defensive end. That's the field spot. And then Vipers, the weak side boundary spot. So when we say defensive end, for Notre Dame's defense, we're talking about that big end position. I love the depth there. You've got R.J. Oben coming in from Duke. He's a good football player. We know what he can do. Josh Burnham moved over there this offseason. He's incredibly gifted, in my opinion. He's got a chance to be a really good football player for Notre Dame this year. And then you have Bryce Young. And they're 3 very different players, in my opinion. And it's one of those things where in most years, a defensive end is not going to come in behind Oben and Burnham and really play. But as you all saw on high school film as a senior, as you all saw at the All-American Bowl, as you all saw in the Blue Gold game, Bryce Young's not your typical freshman. He is an exceptional talent. And it's funny because I remember grading him as a junior, and I think I had him as a 3.5-star player with 4.5-star upside, because you're like, look, you can see the tools, and he wasn't very far from being a 5-star. I just needed to see him fill out his frame a little bit, and then he would get up there to that 5-star category. And I thought, man, by the time this kid's maybe a sophomore, junior in college, he could be really, really good. Well, then Bryce comes out his senior year. He puts on like 20, 25 pounds minimum. He gets taller. He fills out quickly, and he becomes more coordinated. Because you could always see that even on his sophomore film, which wasn't very good, you could see, and he was maybe 200 pounds, you could still see the athleticism with Bryce. You just saw he was kind of a kid to hit a growth spurt. These big old hands, big old feet. He just was this lanky kind of kid. And you see that with like a lot of basketball players where, it takes them a couple years to kind of grow the coordination. They hit that big growth spurt, and the coordination always, not always, but sometimes can be, slow to catch up to the body growth. Well, I think that's what happened with Bryce when he was a younger player. But you could see the twitchiness. You could see the athleticism. He didn't really know what he was doing, but you could see the tools. Junior year, you're like, okay, I feel good about Notre Dame taking him. You can see the talent. You can see the potential. I like what I see from him. And then I remember seeing him in January and be like, yeah, Bryce starting to fill out a little bit, like a little faster than I thought. And you saw him walking in to a visit with his dad, and you're like, Bryce is filling out a little bit. And when he walks in next to his dad, a Hall of Fame defensive tackle, and you see just how big he is, you start saying like, man, like this cat has got some real size. And then he goes out his senior year and he's just dominant. I mean, and you saw it from first game too. You're like, okay, he figured out a lot faster than I thought. So Bryce is now where I thought he'd be as a sophomore, maybe junior, physically and ability to make an impact. He grew a lot faster than I thought he could, his game and his ability. So then by the time he was done, he was a top 50 player with 5-star upside. Like in a year, he did that. And so now he's in a situation where he still has a lot to learn, but he is a dude. And we saw that. He is a flat out dude. I mean, I started hearing whispers from sources maybe a week into fall camp, 2 weeks or spring camp, 2 weeks into spring camp, where you're just like, yeah, it's a hit. We hit on that guy. He's legit. He's going to be really good. Raw, but man, he's athletic. He's got powerful hands. He's a worker. He's coachable. All things that I've heard about Bryce, which is huge. So there's the character level to it, which checks the box. The size checks the box. The athleticism checks the box. If RJ Oben and Josh Burnham are everything I think they can be this year, you still find a role for Bryce Young. There's no doubt. And I could see him at some point in time this season being a really interesting third down option for Notre Dame and their nickel dime packages, because you're talking about a 6'7" twitchy guy that if teams try to throw screens or quick game around him, like I just have this vision of Josh Burnham and RJ and Bryce Young being on the field on third down, whether one's inside, one's outside, whatever, in like pass rush situations. And you're just like, how do you throw over that? Josh Burnham, 6'3.5", 6'4", with really long arms. Bryce Young, 6'7", with really long arms, 6'6.5", really long arms. I think those two guys are going to have an impact this year. Will they be starters? Don't know, don't care. They're going to play. And I think Bryce is a guy that's going to be that. He's going to be a guy that comes in and has I could see him having like an Aaron Lynch type impact as a pass rusher where he plays maybe 15 snaps and gets a sack, plays 12 snaps and gets 2 hurries. Like, I don't think he has to play it. And this is the thing about Bryce. Bryce doesn't, to me, have to play 30 snaps a game to make an impact. When we saw that with Boubacar last year, I mean, Boubacar wasn't even supposed to be on the field, but there was like an injury. I can't remember if it was Patelho or Tuihalamaka got hurt. And then the other guy had to get subbed out, so they put Boubacar in. I think the first snap he's on the field, he gets a flipping sack because he's just got that special twitchiness. And that's kind of how I view Bryce Young. He has that special twitchiness where he can maybe play 10 snaps a game and make an impact and pressure the quarterback and have some success that way as part of the rotation at the position. So that's why when I think of impact guys on defense, he's the first one I go to. The second one I go to is Kingston Viliama-Asa. Now, this is a kid to me that I'm looking at it, and technically I view what he's going to do this year as being more of the rotation, spot. But I think Kingston's going to be a guy that makes a difference in that as part of that rotation. I don't know that he's going to start as a freshman. I know there's a lot of people that want him to, and I get it. He's the new toy, and he's very talented. But there's also some other talented players there. And to me, this is a position where we as fans are going to need to not be so obsessed with who the starter is. That's the reality. Is what I expect from Notre Dame this year is they're going to play a much deeper rotational linebacker. And Jack Kaiser and Drake Bowen are the starters, great. But there's going to be other guys that are going to play. And when you look at Kingston, the fact is they already started cross-training him at multiple positions. They've already had him playing Mike, and they've already had him playing Will. And with the reality that, look, this kid's going to be in the rotation. There's no doubt. I mean, he was swimming a little bit as a early enrollee. I don't care how smart he is. I don't care what kind of system you come from. You go from high school, and I don't care how the most complex high school system in America, and you go play in Al Golden's defense, you're going to initially have some issues picking it all up. And we saw that from Kingston in the spring game. Had a lot of mistakes in the spring game, a lot of bad run fits, a lot of times where he was maybe a step late reacting to what was happening. But when he knew where he was going, you could see it. I mean, you could see the impact. You can see the athleticism. You can see the instincts. You can see the feel, and then you can see the power. Now that he's got those 15 practices under his belt and then a whole summer, he's going to be much further along when you get to the fall. And the reality is he's going to play. He's a guy that's going to – now, first of all, when you talk about special teams, I definitely see him being a starter on special teams. And, again, that's the second category. But I think he's going to be an impact guy on special teams as well as a cover player. And then I also think he's going to be an impact player on defense. Now, is he going to have 60 tackles and 8 tackles for loss? I don't know. I mean, if somebody gets hurt and he has to step in the starting lineup, I think he'll be fine. But do I see him being part of a rotation where he gets like 30 tackles this year and like maybe 5 tackles for loss and a sack and make some really clutch money plays? Yeah, I see that. And if he does that, that's huge because everybody wants to start him, and maybe he does. But for me, what I love about it is if he can be that kind of guy, then I don't care about him starting over Drake. I just want him to spell Drake. I don't care about him starting over Jack Kaiser. I just want him to spell Jack Kaiser because we saw in 2017 with Notre Dame and in 2016 with Notre Dame that you could use a linebacker rotation and get great production from 3 guys. And when you look at the 2017 team especially, I mean, there was 3 linebackers that played inside a lot. It was Niles Morgan and Greer Martini, who a lot of times were the starters, and then Tavon Coney. Those 3 guys played a ton. Well, that season, and Drew Tranquil, if you remember, was the rover. Well, Drew Tranquil had 85 tackles as the rover. Tavon Coney had 116 tackles. Niles Morgan had 92 tackles. And Greer Martini had 75 tackles. She had 4 linebackers with 75 tackles or more that season. And so, again, it was a different type of defense that the linebackers made a lot more plays in Mike Elko's defense than you may see in Al Golden's. But the point is, you can properly use a rotation, and they all play and play well. And then what that's going to do, because my concern with having Drake Bowen as the Mike linebacker this year for a team that's looking to make a 16-game run to a championship is, do I really want 19-year-old Drake Bowen to play 50, 60 snaps a game for 12 games and then have to play 50, 60 snaps a game for 4 more games? Drake is an advanced sophomore. He is big for his age. He's cut. He's athletic, but he's still 19. He's still young. And if you have, and I don't want to put the wear and tear on his body that maybe I did J.D. Bertrand last year, especially since J.D. at most was going to play 2 postseason games, right? For Notre Dame to win a championship last year, they had to play 12 games, and you get a month off, and then you play a semifinal game, and then the championship game like 10 days later. Now you play 12 games, then you have 3 weeks off before your next game, and that begins hopefully a run of 4 games. So I'm not having Drake Bowen playing the number of snaps per game, ideally, as what J.D. Bertrand played last year, as what Tavon Coney and Drew Tranquil played in 2018, for example, because I don't want his body to break down. And the same thing is true for Kingston. I know he's big, but he's still 18 years old. He's still his body. I mean, look, a strong 18-year-old in most instances is not going to be as strong. And when I say strong, not like, who can bench the most, but your strength of your body is not going to be as strong as a 25-year-old. It's just reality. Even the most strong and well-built 18-year-olds are still 18. And so I want to limit those reps. So I like the idea of a rotation there with, Drake Sure starting Mike, Jack's your starting will, and Kingston can do both. Jalen Sneed can play some there, play some Rover, play some will. So I think there's a role for all of them. And if Kingston gets on the field for 15, 20 snaps a game, he's going to make a difference. He's going to make impact plays. And not only is he going to make impact plays on his own, but if he can force his way onto the field for 15, 20 snaps a game, and that takes some of the burden, the snaps burden off of Jack Kaiser, who's not a natural 240-pounder, and takes some of that snaps burden off of Drake Bowen, who's 19, that's going to be huge. And the three of them, and maybe four of them, if Jalen Sneed plays a lot more inside, he may play more Rover. We'll see how that shapes up. But those guys, to me, playing a rotation allows all of them to, because your two big guys are freshman and a sophomore. Your experienced guys are a little smaller. And I know that, Jack's listed, but anyone that's seen Jack Kaiser, he's still not a big guy. Jalen Sneed's not even 220 pounds. The more you can use a rotation there, the better. So not only will Kingston, if he steps up, and I expect him to, have an impact from what he does, but it also then impacts positively the other linebackers because it takes some of the burden off of them from a snap standpoint, which allows them to stay fresher. I think enhances their ability to stay healthy because it doesn't just take reps off their bodies in games. I've said this before. Having a backup that can play and take 15 snaps off of you on Saturdays, that's fine. That's not the end-all, be-all. It's you got to get reps during the week for that guy as well. And taking some of that burden on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and those type of things is going to be just as impactful, in my opinion, as taking the snaps off of, 15 snaps off of his guy's shoulders in the game. So I'm excited to see what Kingston's going to do. I'm excited to see what Drake Bowen's going to do. We're going to talk about him tomorrow. But I just think as a duo, either at the same position, sometimes side by side, like there's going to be times this year that Kingston comes in for Drake, in my opinion. I also think there's going to be times this year when we see Drake and Kingston side by side. And that's going to get some people fired up. No question about it. So those are my two instant impact players from the Notre Dame defense. Potential rotation special teams guys, this list is a little bit longer than it is for offense. And I'm going to start with Sean Sevillano. Now, you could potentially make a case that he should be in the instant impact category because I do think he's going to be able to come in and make some plays. But my issue with Sean is I don't know what kind of volume he's going to be able to give early on. We'll see. But at the very least, Sean Sevillano has the size, power, and quickness combination to come in and help you right away. And the good news is, just from what we saw in the spring, Sean showed me more athletically than what I thought he had in high school. I was not, as you guys know, I was not super high on Sean Sevillano. I liked him. I thought he could help you. I was glad they got him. Gave him as a top 350 caliber player with 4-star upside. I don't know that I would go away from that yet, but I do think that he showed me more playmaking ability at college. Now, I know he made a lot of plays in high school. I don't care about that. It's about projecting the next level. I recruited a 5,000-yard running back to come play for me at a Division III school in Ohio, right? Like production doesn't matter as much as how does your skill set translate? And I knew Sean was going to help out right away because he's so big and strong. He's very strong. But that's fine. Okay, so he can come in and eat up blocks. Cool, there's a need for that. Can he come in and make plays? And that's the thing that Sean Sevillano showed throughout the spring that I didn't know that he could do this early in his career. That's a great sign. I always told y'all, I don't have a problem being wrong if me being wrong is I wasn't high on a guy and he's better than I think. I love that. So far, Sean has shown me that he's got a little bit more to him than I thought he did, which is a great sign because it gives you a well over 300-pound kid that you can kind of plug in the middle of the defense. At the very least, he's going to be a goal line guy, an occasional maybe 5 to 8 snaps a game guy. I think he does that right away. May not play every game. There may be some games against some teams that go tempo that you don't necessarily want him in outside of goal line situations. Okay, cool, but he's going to help you this year. At the safety position, there's a couple guys to keep an eye on. Number one is Bronte Johnson. Now, I don't know that Bronte is going to be able to play as a freshman. The shoulder injury he had and the fact that he's kind of skinny gives me pause. And it makes me want to take my time with him. Now, here's the rub that Notre Dame finds itself in. Bronte Johnson as an athlete is probably not a 5-year player. just God-given ability. But the shoulder injury plus the fact that he's so raw makes me think maybe he could be a guy that's a senior fifth-year guy, that he does need a little bit more time, and then when the light goes on, he's really good. But I don't know that I would necessarily purposely redshirt him. I think Bronte's a kid that is going to be very attractive to the Notre Dame coaches from the standpoint of, man, you really want that speed running down on a punt. Man, you really want that speed playing center field. So at the very least, if he's healthy, he at least has a chance to earn maybe a punt cover spot, a spot as a nickel safety at some point. I think probably the likelihood is more of a rotation, maybe in the two deep, maybe play a little bit for Bronte and then maybe play on like one special team is kind of where I see him, just because I'm concerned about his physique this early in his career. And especially since he's coming off the shoulder injury, I'd be really careful with Bronte in year one. I don't want that shoulder to become an issue. If it checks out and he's good and there's no issues with it, then I think Bronte's athletic enough and talented enough to help you in some capacity. The other guy to keep an eye on is Kennedy Urlacher. I've heard some really good things from my sources about how well Kennedy played this spring. I saw a little bit from him this spring. I told you guys I liked what I saw. Matter of fact, saw him and Logan Thomas at Costco on Sunday when I was Costco shopping with my wife. And Kennedy is a little taller than I thought he was going to be as well. And so he was about my height, and I'm about 6 feet tall. And so he was about my height, maybe slightly taller. But I was kind of hunched over the cart because at that point in time, I was so ready to be gone. I so wanted to be home. But he's got some size to him. He can hit. But the thing he showed this spring is he can run a little bit more besides just downhill. I've been staff. What I'm told is the staff really likes him and thinks he's going to be a really good football player. And there was even with some, he was a pleasant surprise because I don't know that everybody thought Kennedy was going to be a difference maker. But when I look at Kennedy Urlacher, I see a kid that at the very least this year is going to be on special teams. And that's what I always thought about him. I don't see how you don't have him running down on kickoff and punt coverage. I think he's going to have chances to be that kind of guy. And so he's a guy that's on my list as well. And if some of the guys ahead of him don't play well at safety, I could see him pushing some guys out. I could see him, pushing a Ben Minnick out. If Ben Minnick gets hurt again, I could see Kennedy stepping into that role and not giving it up. I really could. Physically, he's got the size, he's got the speed, he's got the physicality. It's just about, can he cover? And he did a better job of that than maybe I thought, but we'll see kind of what he can do. Let's get into a couple more guys. So 4 or 5 months ago, if you'd have told me, Leonard Moore, Carson Hobbs, I'd say I don't expect much of them as freshmen. Not because they're not capable of it, but because you're so loaded. You've got Benjamin Morrison, you've got Christian Gray, you've got Jaden Mickey, you've got Chance Tucker, you've got Micah Bell, and you're good to go. Well, now Benjamin's banged up, Micah Bell's gone, and you're in a situation now where if somebody gets hurt, you're going to need one of these freshmen to be in your two deep. You just are. And what I believe Notre Dame did is and we've talked about this in the past, is I think there were some transfer corners they were looking at, and what Notre Dame decided, including some potential, Ivy League walk-on type situations, and Notre Dame decided to pass. And the reason they decided to pass is because of the confidence that if there is a need for another corner, one of these two kids is going to help you out. And, you've got we were told that, right now Carson's getting a little bit of work at nickel and outside. Leonard's definitely a guy that has some field and boundary potential. I think he's more of a boundary guy right now, and Carson more of a field nickel guy right now. And they're both going to get opportunities to push their way into the field this season and compete. So they both know the opportunities in front of them. And I don't know that they were told that, hey, we're not bringing in a transfer because of you guys, but that's a big reason why they didn't bring in a transfer. Is, look, we got one of the best cornerback coaches in the business, and these two kids are talented and they can run. Let's coach them up, get them ready. And I think both of those guys are, at least one of those guys at some point in time this year is going to be in the two deep, if not both. And I think with Carson, with his speed and strength, I could also see Carson being a guy that's a special teams rotation, if not a starter, at least in the two deep of special teams, like right away with his combination of size and speed. And I could see Leonard being a guy that, if he can stay healthy, could be a guy that forces his way into the two deep at corner. Like, just like, not even because somebody got hurt, just, okay, I'm this good, I'm going to be playing here. So I think those two corners have a chance to make an immediate impact. And they're going to need it. I mean, this is one of those positions where it could come down to not even just about, okay, are you good enough to help us? But, from a coaching standpoint, it's like, but we need you to help us because of whatever factors. And that's going to be a big part of what goes into, what this group can be. And so I expect those two corners to get an opportunity to be rotation special teams. And again, as I've said before, I'm not a fan of redshirting skill players. I'm not. There's always exceptions. I just got done talking about how I'd at least consider Bronte because of the shoulder and his body, and he was a little banged up last year. Let's just get him healthy and put separation between him and Adon and Luke and those type of guys, and then just go about it that way. But usually I'm not a fan of redshirting skill players. And I would say the same thing is true of Leonard Moore and Carson Hobbs. I'm not opposed to it, but my preference is to let them play. So we'll see if that happens or not. We'll see if those guys get that opportunity. But they are certainly capable of it as rookies, of coming in and being in the rotation. They're very talented players. Redshirt wise, Logan Thomas, obviously, 200-pound kid coming off an injury. He needs a red shirt. Cole Mullins coming off an injury. He needs a red shirt. They're trying to grow him into a defensive tackle already for some weird reason, but he needs time. Teddy Rizak, to me, is a likely red shirt guy, although I could see Teddy with his – Teddy's fast. He's really fast. I could see a scenario where it's like, yeah, we wanted to red shirt him, but the kid could be a starter on all of our coverage units. I could see something like that. I prefer that Teddy red shirt. I actually like red shirting linebackers, especially guys like Bodie and Teddy Rizak, who need some physical development. And in Teddy's case, it's physical development. In Bodie's case, it's technical and experience development. And then the other thing about Bodie Cahoon, who is 6'3", 220 plus, fast. Bodie's physically could probably help you right now, but he's another guy that technically he's only played linebacker for really like a full season, where you could teach him a lot. The other thing, too, is I'd love to be able to get some separation eligibility-wise between him and Drake and Jaden Alsbury, because, it's just – I just would like to see maybe get a little bit of separation there with those two guys. And those are the two reasons I would consider retaining as linebackers. But, man, it's tough because, like, with Teddy, it may seem like a no-brainer. Like, he's 6'4", he's 195 pounds. Of course you're going to redshirt him, and you should. But then you watch him, I bet you this moment happens for Notre Dame this year, where their thought process going in is, we're going to redshirt Teddy Rizak. This is just my opinion. But knowing the staff, I would not be surprised if when they look at Teddy, think, okay, we're going to redshirt him and he's going to develop, and then next spring he's going to get a chance to really work into the two deep, and we like him because they like Teddy Rizak a lot. They do, and Bodie Cahoon. And then all of a sudden you're in the middle of fall camp and you're doing a punt cover drill or a kickoff drill, and you're just getting your athletes just running downfield and getting to a spot, because what you work on, and sometimes it's like, okay, we're doing a kickoff drill. You're not necessarily running down and feeling the kickoff. You're running down and you're working on proper angles, and you're working on staying in your lane, and then, getting to a certain aiming point. And then you do that, and all of a sudden, or you're working on punt block drill. And all of a sudden you're like, dude, this Rizak kid is like always the first guy down there because he's so fast. He's like blocking punts. He's just, man, that kid can fly. Man, are we sure we want to redshirt him? I could see that conversation happening. Now, ultimately, I think you'd likely will still redshirt him. But I could see a conversation happening where you're thinking about, man, it's like, boy, it's the best thing for him is to redshirt him, I think. But, man, that speed, holy moly, how do you keep that speed off the field on special teams? I could see that conversation happening. But I think ultimately I'd like to see him still be a redshirt guy just because of the size. And then also you've got Tabron Benny Powell. I think Tabron's another guy that most likely needs to be a guy that gets a redshirt this season. So that's my breakdown of the Notre Dame freshman class. I think when you look at it as a whole, there's a lot to like there. There's going to be potential early impact players. I talked about Cam Williams, Micah Gilbert, Gerby Lambert on offense. Bryce Young and Kingston Viliama-Asa on defense. There's potential for 2 deep roles, the 2 running backs, Kedron Young and Aeneas Williams. You've got CJ Carr potentially winning the number 2 quarterback job. You've got Sean Sevillano, who's going to provide a role. You've got, potentially the, 2 or 3 at least of your defensive backs. Kennedy Urlacher has a chance to maybe come in right away, be a special teams weapon for Notre Dame. And then, of course, you've got some guys that are most likely going to need to redshirt. So, those are all things where you look at it and say, hey, this freshman class is going to make its presence felt this year. And if it does make its presence felt, that's good for Notre Dame, because there's really few places, maybe running back, maybe corner, where you maybe safety, where you say they need a freshman to come in. And I would even argue it's a maybe there, or injuries need to happen there. There's no way, like tight end's not, maybe tight end because of injuries. There's not a lot of positions, however, where it's like, man, they need a freshman to come in and play. Boy, if Sean Sevillano doesn't come in and be ready to play, they're not going to have a very good depth chart at no defensive tackle. Not the case at all. They are loaded at that position. Same with defensive end, and same at receiver. And I mean, there's years where Micah Gilbert and Cam Williams, we'd be talking about, hey, those guys might start by the end of the year, the way that Notre Dame's receiving corps has been in past years. They're at least going to play a ton. Well, now those 2 really talented players are going to have to battle, prove themselves. That's a great place to be, but I think this freshman class is just ultimately too good not to make its presence felt this year. It may not be as big, because like what I presented in the show today is the potential that each player has. It's not predicting that they're all going to have that happen. I'm not predicting that Cam, Micah, Gerby, Bryce, and Kingston are all going to be impact players as freshmen, and that Aeneas and Kedron and CJ and Sevillano and Bronte and Kennedy Urlacher and Leonard Moore and Carson Hobbs are all going to be in the 2 deep at some point. I'm not predicting that that's going to happen. What I'm saying is there's an opportunity for those guys in those categories to have that type of their presence be felt. And I think we will see their presence be felt. I do. I think that's where it's going to come down to. And that's what this team is going to have to go out there and prove and show that they can be those type of players. So that's the freshman impact for Notre Dame. I'm going to take a little quick break here so I can get my notes prepped for the second section of today's show. And that's going to be, we're going to talk about the Heisman Trophy in 2024. So, but before we do that, folks, hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. And if you go to boards.irishbreakdown.com, you could probably get signed up and be almost done by the time we get back from our break and get done with our intro for the next section. So you could definitely, I think if you do that, let's go ahead and try it. Go to boards.irishbreakdown.com, sign up, and be ready to come back and rock and roll as we get into our next section of today's show. So part 3 of today's show is going to focus on the Heisman Trophy. So part of what we're going to do this summer is going to preview other aspects of college football. There aren't going to be a lot of shows where the whole show is dictated towards like national college football. This is still a Notre Dame channel, but I do think it's fun and there's merit in knowing about what else is out there. And I've always said this, if you don't know what else is out there, how do you know where Notre Dame stacks up, right? And so we are going to do some stuff, and so we're going to have some fun with some different things. And the first one we're going to do is talk about the Heisman Trophy. So we'll look at it from 2 angles, but sort of 2 segments, but 3 angles. One is just nationally, who are, in my opinion, this is my opinion, of the top Heisman contenders. I'm going to go through leagues and talk about guys that I think have a chance to be Heisman contenders, let you know who I think the more obvious candidates are, maybe some sleeper guys or some guys to keep an eye on that, could be that type of breakout player. Then I'll talk about Notre Dame and who Notre Dame's Heisman Trophy contenders are. And I did say plural because I could see a couple guys having that opportunity. And then third is going to be looking at Notre Dame's opponent schedule and who are the Heisman Trophy contenders on the Notre Dame schedule that have a chance to go out there and maybe to some degree be Heisman Trophy contenders. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to get into that here next. So a reminder to folks too, our show time is moved to 1 p.m. Eastern now for the summer. Don't know if that's going to continue once the season starts, but as of right now, I think that's what we're going to do. But shows start at 1 o'clock now Eastern, because I saw at 2 o'clock our numbers spike. So I think there's a lot of people that forgot that, or maybe weren't there when the show when we talked about that last week. So, but we're going to start at 1 p.m. the rest of the way. So let's dive into the Heisman Trophy. When I look at Heisman Trophy contenders this year, it's a very interesting year. And like I saw someone in the chat, Carson Beck's the leader, right? And I mean, I think that's the perception. I don't know that I would say I agree with that per se. I think it's possible. I think Carson Beck did some good things last year, and I'll talk about him more, and I've talked about him before. But I don't think there's like this no-brainer, this guy's going to be really dynamic and just an impact player, future number one draft pick. I don't think there's as much of that this year. I think there's a lot of potential candidates. I think this is one of those years where certainly the top 5 candidates could end up being the top 5 when it all comes down to it. But I could also see a big shakeup where maybe only one of the perceived top candidates is there at the end of the day. But because there's just so many different ways that could happen, some teams that could break out, some very intriguing players that could come about it. So, and then of course Heisman Trophy. I'm looking at it from the standpoint of how they're viewed. It's not what I think it should be. It's not that I think it should be more of an all positions trophy. We understand that it's an offensive trophy by and large. I think there's been one defensive winner in my lifetime, and the guys that won it before that were defensive players were back in the day, like Leon Hart, where they were like two-way players. But it's a primary offensive player. There's one defensive player that I'll talk about in the Notre Dame section, but this is a primarily offensive-driven award. It's primarily a quarterback award with potential for some running backs and receivers to break in. And so we're going to look at it from the realistic aspect of what the Heisman Trophy is, not what it should be. And so I'm not trying to get into a moral rant about what should the Heisman Trophy actually do. I'll have that for another day, perhaps. But today is just going to look at, based on the criteria of the Heisman Trophy, primarily offensive players, primarily offensive skill players, and also largely the starting quarterbacks on the best teams. That's really what the Heisman Trophy comes down to. So we'll have some fun with that, and we'll talk nationally. And so I'm going to start with the SEC because I have more guys in the SEC than I do other leagues. And the reason why is a lot of it is because I believe this league returns the most impact talent. A lot of other leagues were really hindered by losses. The Big Ten had some guys that, had they chosen to come back, would certainly be on this list. I think J.J. McCarthy would be on this list if he would have come back. Marvin Harrison Jr. would have been on this list if he would have come back. And those guys left as true juniors. So, that league was impacted quite a bit by departures. And so when I look at the SEC, there's a lot of players coming back, plus the addition of Oklahoma and Texas adds some Heisman Trophy contenders as well. So I'm going to start first in the SEC with the quarterbacks. And I believe there's four quarterbacks in the SEC that have a chance to be Heisman contenders this year. And I'm going to start off with the guy that most people perceive to be as sort of the leader in the clubhouse, going into the season. And, look, you got to start somewhere, right? The preseason rankings got to start somewhere. And somebody's got to be number one. And it's the same thing with the Heisman Trophy. Somebody's got to kind of be considered who's the number one guy. And I think a lot of instances it should be Carson Beck. And when you look at Carson Beck, you say, well, why? And so, here's reason number one. He plays on the best team in college football, perceived best team in college football, in the Georgia Bulldogs. So that right there, he's the quarterback on the perceived best team in college football. That's going to get you recognition. He's coming off of a season last year. We had as a first-year starter, had 3,941 passing yards, completed 72.4% of his passes, had averaged 9.5 yards per attempt. Those are outstanding numbers that ranked him among the nation's best last year. His touchdown numbers weren't great. He only threw 24 touchdowns, rushed for 4. So that's only 28 touchdowns in 14 games. I'm not overly concerned about that. I just think that was sort of circumstance. Guys, just the way drives went, guys getting tackled and then they run it in, on next plays. Only threw 6 picks as well as a first-year starter. First-year starter only throwing 6 interceptions. He threw 417 passes last year. and only threw 6 interceptions. So I think Carson Beck's certainly a guy that deserves to be in that conversation. My only pushback would be I don't think Carson Beck was necessarily great against the really good teams they played, and there weren't many that they played that were really good. I didn't think he was great against Missouri last year. I didn't think he was great against Alabama last year. High completion percentage, but I didn't think he played great. He had some missed opportunities in that game that I thought kind of gave them some issues. So, he had some very good games. There's no doubt about it. But I didn't think he was great in some of those bigger moments. It was pretty good against Ole Miss, but their defense is a hot mess. We didn't see him against, like I said, he struggled against Bama, in my opinion. We didn't see him against, he probably would have tore up LSU, but we didn't get to see him necessarily against some of the better SEC defenses last year. And there weren't a lot of great SEC defenses last year. That's the other part of it. So when I look at him and I say, hey, this is a pretty talented football player, and it's going to be a focal point. Now, the other thing is he's going to have some new weapons this year. So obviously this will have some of the transfers that came in last year will come back, but they lost Ladd McConkey. They lost Brock Bowers. That's going to matter. They lost one of their starting offensive linemen. Their offensive line should still be pretty good. So, but I think Carson Beck has a chance, but he's a guy that to me is going to have to play better in the bigger games to prove himself. Now, I have a level of confidence he will. Again, he was a first-year starter. And I think for a first-year starter, he did some good things. And I believe the schedule being kind of soft for Georgia, and I'm trying, and I'm not saying soft. The teams were soft, but some teams that aren't necessarily good teams still can have good defenses, right? And so like I think Kentucky had a decent defense last year. Numbers don't necessarily always reflect it, but I thought they were a decent defense last year, and he did very well in that game. Tore that defense up. And scored over 50 points and completed 80% of his passes, threw for almost 400 yards. That's a good performance. But when Kentucky's like arguably your best, defensive opponent of the regular season, Missouri's in there, it's like, okay, did you really face a gauntlet? And he didn't. This year, he's certainly going to face a much, much better defensive slate. He's going to, right out of the gate, he plays against one of the best defenses of college football in Clemson. They got to play Alabama on the road. They got to play Texas. So he'll be challenged. And so I think the thing that's going to help Carson this year is if his production is similar to last year and Georgia's a 10, 11, maybe 12-win team, he's going to get a ton of recognition, deservedly so, because if his numbers are like they were last year, if he can repeat just the numbers he did, there's going to be no debate that he did it against a much, much tougher schedule. So there won't be any, did he play anybody stuff about Carson Beck. If Carson Beck is in there at the end of the season, he earned it. He earned it because when you look at the schedule that they play. So he's certainly in that conversation. Another guy to look at is Quinn Ewers. Quinn Ewers is one of the more polarizing quarterbacks in college football, man. He is a very, very interesting player. You hear people talking about, getting into the season and, he might get benched and this guy could beat him out. He may get beat out by Arch Manning. I'm sitting there drawing a blank on Arch Manning. Last year it was Malik Murphy. This year it's Arch Manning. And, just looking at it from the standpoint of, it's what I've always said. He's a guy that to me was way overhyped coming out of high school. And now he's a guy that's getting way too much criticism now and not getting enough, in my opinion, enough criticism for the kind of season he had last year. If you look at his numbers last year, he passed for 3,479 yards. He only played 12 games because he missed 2 regular season games. But then they also played in the game 13 was in the Big 12 title game, and game 14 was against Washington. So he played 12 games, completed 69% of his passes, averaged 8.82 yards per attempt, which is good, not elite, but pretty good. Threw 20 touchdowns and only had 6 picks. And then he added, I believe, 4 rushing touchdowns last season as well. And he did a little 5, actually. Had 5 rushing touchdowns last year. And I thought he was pretty good in some of their bigger games. I know he had a big turnover against Oklahoma, but I also think he, at times in that game, put Texas on his shoulders and led them to victory. He was brilliant at Alabama. You look at Carson Beck against Georgia and then Quinn Ewers against Georgia, it's not even close. He was way better against Georgia than Carson Beck was. So if you look at Carson Beck last year against Georgia in a 27-24 loss on a neutral field, He went 21 of 29, just good, 72.4%. Only threw for 243 yards, 8.4 yards per attempt, no touchdowns, no picks, and had -2 rushing yards. Did rush it for a touchdown in that game. And then you look at what Quinn Ewers did at Alabama in a 34-24 win. He went 24 of 38, passed for 349 yards, averaged 9.2 yards per attempt, threw for 3 touchdowns in that game at Alabama, and had positive rushing yards. And that was a game where Texas kind of rolled in the fourth quarter of that game. So on the biggest stage last season, he was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. He had some good games during the season, was like I said, had some very good moments against Oklahoma, had the bad turnover, was pretty good against Houston until he got hurt, comes back from his injury, and they didn't really play anybody the next 3 games, and they didn't really ask him to do a whole lot. Then they get into the Big 12 title game, and he absolutely torches Oklahoma State. Passes for 452 yards, 9.8 yards per attempt, and throws 4 touchdowns in that game, and has, I think it was his highest passer rating of the season in the Big 12 title game. Goes out in the college football playoff, and I thought he played well. Had some misses in there, but had some good runs. I thought his receivers didn't help him out early. His O-line didn't help him out at all. But he made some big throws in that game. And so when you look at a guy, that's now going into his 3rd year as a starter, a guy that's really had 2 good games against Washington because he also played pretty well the year before, a guy that has shown some ability in some big moments to make some big throws. He wasn't great against Oklahoma last year. He lit Oklahoma up the year before and was a really, really good football player. So I like Quinn Ewers. I think he's a guy that is going to be the starting quarterback on a team that I perceive to be a top 5 team. We're going to find out early when they head to Michigan how good he is, because Michigan, I don't think, is going to be a great team this year, but I think their defense is still going to be really good, and their pass defense should still be at least decent. At the very least, you've got Will Johnson, who's arguably the best corner in college football. You've got some guys transferred in, losing Rod Moore hurt. Obviously, Keon Sabb transferred to Alabama, but their pass defense should still be pretty good, in my opinion. And then Quinn Ewers is going to get plenty of big game opportunities. They got to play Georgia again this year. They got to play Oklahoma. So he's a guy that's on my list as a contender. 2 other SEC quarterbacks to kind of look at that are very similar players as sort of a little bit more dual threat guys. That's Jackson Dart at Ole Miss and Jalen Milroe at Alabama. Jackson Dart's an interesting player. I'm still not – look, Jackson was better than I thought he was going to be last year. He had a good season last year, passed for 3,364 yards, 23 touchdowns, 5 picks. Rushed for 8 touchdowns. He had 31 total touchdowns. Ran for 389 yards. Completed 9.4 yards per attempt. And he did some good things. But when I look at Jackson Dart, he's still way too inconsistent for me. And he struggled big time against Georgia early in that game. Really struggled. And had some other moments where I thought he struggled, and some key moments where, he didn't play very well against Alabama last year. Had some big throws against Tulane, but also had some inconsistent moments against Tulane. I didn't think he played that well against Arkansas last season. He didn't play very well, in my opinion, in the game against Mississippi State. In his defense, if I remember correctly, it was a lot of rain that game. And then he played really well against Penn State in the bowl game. So he's still a lot. I think Jason Smith just said it in the chat. Very inconsistent kid. Well, he grew up a lot last year. The question is, did he peak? Like, is that as good as he's going to be? Just when he's on, but when he's not, he's not. Or can he become a more consistently impactful player? That's going to be the key for Jackson Dart when it comes to being a Heisman Trophy contender, is can he be a guy that comes out and he can repeat those performances and then do it in some of the bigger games? He can't put up big numbers and then struggle against Georgia, struggle against Alabama, and then be in a Heisman Trophy contender, right? That just can't happen. And so he's going to have to be more consistent. Now, the good news is he's going to have a pretty good team around him. I know they lost Quinshon Judkins. They've got good running backs. I'm not worried about that. They got Logan Diggs transferred in. If Logan's healthy, and I don't know that he's going to be healthy at the start of the season, but when he gets back, if he can stay healthy, that helps them. They got a couple other good running backs. They have 3 starters on the O-line returning, I believe, and then they added 2 transfers on the offensive line that are quality players. And then they've got in my opinion, their 2 best receivers coming back this year. Trey Harris is a very good football player. And so I think they're off. And of course, you've got Lane Kiffin and Charlie Weiss Jr. So you've got very good offensive minds. Can the defense get better? That's going to be a key too. If he's got to have to win shootouts every year, that's putting a lot of pressure on Jackson Dart, and he's not Jaden Daniels. And I don't know that he's going to be able to live up to that. So if the defense can get better, and they added some good players, but that's going to be a key for me, is going to be consistency. The defense has to help out a little bit, but he's going to have weapons. Can he be consistent? And then Jalen Milroe is a very similar player. At times last year, Jalen Milroe was dynamic. I mean, he was an impactful player, and not just as a runner too. I mean, we all know that he can run, but I mean, if you watch the A&M game, he made some big throws in that A&M game. I thought he played poorly against Texas for a chunk of the game. And they were about to get wiped out, and Jalen made some big-time plays to kind of somewhat get them back in that game. And so he showed some ability to be a difference maker. And he's not going to he didn't put up sexy numbers last year, but you could see him go out there and just make plays with his legs and make plays with his arm and say, this kid's got a big arm. He can throw the ball over the top of the field and do all that. But if it was the same coaching staff coming back, I don't believe that I'd have Jalen Milroe as a really legitimate Heisman Trophy winning contender. These are guys that I think have a chance to maybe win it or finish the top 2 or 3. He'd be like he was last year, 5th or 6th, just because he's at Bama and Bama's good. The question now is, if he can be the starting quarterback in Kalen DeBoer's offense, maintain that job and thrive in that job. If he can thrive in that role, then I think he's going to be a legit Heisman Trophy winner, because I've said before, I think Bama's going to be a very good team this year. I don't think they're going to take the step back. A lot of people think that they will. They're not going to be maybe quite as look the same, and I don't know if they're going to be quite Heisman Trophy winning potential. But I think they're a playoff team this year. I do. And I think they're a team that could be dangerous in the playoff. Jalen Milroe being able to handle Kalen DeBoer's offense and fit into that offense is going to be a big reason why they do or don't thrive. If he can, and this is also partly on Kalen DeBoer. And I think Kalen DeBoer, the reason I'm confident that Kalen DeBoer is going to be able to adjust is because of where he's been. He hasn't been at like Georgia's whole career in Ohio State, where you just kind of recruit the players you want. He's been at Sioux Falls, Fresno State, Indiana, even Washington, where you kind of have to, this is the best we can do, or this is what we have, and I've got to tailor things a little bit to fit those players. Well, if you look at a guy like Jalen Milroe, he doesn't really fit what Kalen DeBoer did with Michael Penix, per se. But there's a lot of what they do that you're like, I could see him doing that, and that. And if they tailor this part around it and maybe, utilize some more read zone concepts, utilize some RPO stuff that fits a little bit more of his specific skill set, there's a lot of other things he can do. What is one thing Washington did a lot last year? Andrew Gilmore was talking about this. He goes, Milroe can definitely throw a deep ball. Absolutely. Well, what is Washington? They throw a lot of deep balls. Now, can he do it accurately? That's a legitimate question. But there's no throw on the field he can't physically make with arm strength. So how does he temper that? Or how does he tailor that to fit Milroe's skill set? That's a good question. And if Milroe can adjust and grow his game, and if Kalen DeBoer can tailor what he does with his offense philosophically and play calling to be more suited to what Jalen Milroe does, then I think Jalen's going to put up a lot of numbers this year. I think he's a good football player, a talented college quarterback, and in the right system could be I thought he was overrated last year. I thought he was just get a lot of hype because he was at Bama, but you could see the skill, and now he's got another year under his belt as a starter, or a year under his belt as a starter. I think he's going to be a better player if he can adjust and if Kalen DeBoer is willing to work with him. So very, very interesting player. And there's a lot of leadership he's got to prove this year too, because I'll just say this. We were told he got benched against South Florida. I heard some rumblings from some folks that I know in college football that it was actually not a benching as much as for play as it was for a benching for other reasons. And you can't have that from your quarterback. You can't. So he's going to have to do that. Also in the SEC, I do have 2 non-quarterbacks that I'm keeping my eye on this year. And my 2 non-quarterbacks to keep an eye on are, to begin, number 1 is Luther Burden. And that shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. Luther last year had a breakout season as a sophomore, caught 86 passes, 1,212 yards, 14.1 yards per catch. and also had 9 touchdowns last season. And I think there's a chance he could get even better. The nice thing about it is your quarterback comes back. There's Notre Dame and other schools reached out to your offensive coordinator. He stayed. So there's some system continuity. They don't have Cody Schrader anymore, so they're going to probably throw the ball a little bit more this year. You are in a situation where you have some of your better receivers come back. Mookie Cooper comes back, and Theo Weiss comes back. And I think Theo Weiss is a good football. Theo Weiss could be a number 1 for some teams in the SEC. Not like the top teams, but other teams. So he comes back. He's going to be there to take some of that pressure off of Theo Weiss. So now you have 2 players that are difference makers. And again, I like Mookie Cooper as well. So you can't put your entire game plan around stopping Luther Burden. And Kirby Moore also last year showed that he's able to move Kellen around Luther around in ways that allows him to get in some good matchup situations. So, I mean, I could see if Missouri's able to win 10-plus games again, I could see Luther Burden being a 90-plus catch guy, 1,400+ yards, 12, 13, 14 touchdowns, and be a guy that we look at if none of the quarterbacks really break out, because that's what's going to take for somebody like that to step up is like you either have a monster season like Devontae Smith did in 2020, or you have a really, really impactful season, and none of the other quarterbacks are like lighting the world on fire. Like they're all good, but they're not like Caleb Williams in 2022 or Kyler Murray in 2018 or Joe Burrow in 2019. That's where I think a guy like that could maybe get in there. Another player that I have on my list for the SEC, and this is going to surprise some people, is Gavin Sawchuk, who, if you all remember, Notre Dame fans probably remember him because he was a guy that Notre Dame recruited. And he is a dark horse candidate. And here's the reason I say Gavin Sawchuk. Go with me here, because you're talking about a guy that last year only rushed for 744 yards and 9 touchdowns. That's all he did last year. And you're talking about him in the Heisman Trophy conversation. I am, and here's why. I don't believe he's going to be a candidate. But you've got a sophomore quarterback that's taken over for the first time. You have an offensive line that is going to be a little bit problematic, I believe. And you're going to need a guy that can kind of take some of that burden off your young quarterback and your offensive line. I think Gavin Sawchuk can be that guy. He's really fast. He averaged 6.2 yards per carry last year as a sophomore. He's a guy that's gotten stronger. He's a guy that can catch the ball out of the backfield. They used him a little bit for that last year. I expect them to do that a little bit more this season. But he's a guy that it's like, look, if Oklahoma is going to be a top 10 team, it's because somebody like him breaks out and is really good. And I've seen a couple people have Oklahoma as a top 10, borderline top 10 team. If that happens, they're going to need Gavin Sawchuk to be that guy. And so he could potentially be one of those running backs that has a breakout season. So he's one of my ones. And then I have another sleeper pick in the SEC as well, and that's C.J. Baxter at Texas. I could see a scenario with the offensive line that they have. Now, Jadon Blue's also there, and he's very good. And I don't think C.J. Baxter is going to get enough of the volume to be a guy that goes out and is a Heisman contender. But I could see a scenario where he has a breakout season and becomes kind of that guy. Now, and for the record, IGK, I agree with you. I still like Jadarian Price over Gavin Sawchuk, but Gavin Sawchuk's going to get a lot more opportunities this year. But I could see a scenario where C.J. Baxter has this big breakout season, and because he isn't someone that's expected, because you know how it is, every year there's some guy that nobody is talking about as being a Heisman contender that has a breakout season, and then all of a sudden he gets a lot of love. I could see C.J. Baxter being that kind of guy, but I still like Quinn Ewers as my top candidate from Texas. So that's my SEC look for Heisman candidates. Let's next move on over to the Big Ten. As I said earlier, part of the reason I don't have as many guys in the Big Ten on my list is because of the departures. And here's the one glaring thing from my Big Ten list. I only have one quarterback on my Big Ten list. And I know a lot of people, Will Howard. No, Will Howard's not a Heisman contender. In no universe, in my opinion, should Will Howard be considered a Heisman Trophy contender. Now, I think Ohio State has a couple Heisman Trophy contenders, but it's not Will Howard. Yes, he's the quarterback on a team that's going to be really, really good. I don't think his production is going to come anywhere close to what it's going to be from some other guys. I really don't. And so, to me, I look at Washington. Will Rogers is gone. You lost Caleb Williams. You lost J.J. McCarthy. you lost a lot of your high-level, like, impact quarterbacks who are now gone, and I don't view Drew Aller as a guy that's a Heisman contender. I think Drew Aller gets a lot more criticism than he should. My guy D. Trollhunter and I have had some conversations about that. I think Drew Aller is better than people give him credit for. I think the issue for him last year was expectations. He was a sophomore who never really started, who was being asked to be a Heisman Trophy contender, and people put too much on him. I think he did some good things. I think their offensive system stunk. Their offensive line stunk. He's a nice player. He's not a Heisman contender. Like that, not at all. And so I think there's a lot of these teams in the Big Ten where your best player is going to be a non-quarterback. And that's why I only have Dillon Gabriel as a Heisman Trophy contender. When you look at Gabriel, it really comes down to, number one, can he win the job and hold on to the job? Can he outplay Dante Moore? I expect him to. But can he then hold that job and all season? And what I mean by that is can he stay healthy? I don't think Dillon Gabriel loses a starting job to Dante Moore if he's healthy, but he's had trouble staying healthy in his career. So when you look at Dillon Gabriel and you talk about the system he's going into, it really comes down to, are you in a situation where he's going to be able to put up Heisman Trophy caliber numbers? Well, there's no doubt about that. I mean, you look at what Bo Nix did last year, and did Bo finish second or third in Heisman, Trophy voting last year, right? Well, big reason for that is Bo went out last year and threw for 4,500 yards, 45 touchdowns, and 3 picks. Do I think Dillon Gabriel is going to have that level of production? No, I don't think so. I think the offense is going to look a little bit different. But if he's healthy, I mean, he's a 4,000-yard passer for a team that's going to be a top 10 team. He's going to throw for 30-plus touchdowns, have 200-300 yards rushing, 5-6 rushing touchdowns, and be a solid player. And so I think Dillon Gabriel has all the ingredients that you need to be a legit Heisman contender. He's in a system that's going to produce a lot of yards and stats. He's going to be on a quarterback on a team that I think has a chance. I mean, I'm not as high on Oregon as others. I have them in the top 10. I have them 7th. If they're slightly better than I think they are, they're top 5, and that makes them a Heisman contender. And he's going to have plenty of spotlight games. Because the thing that hurt Bo Nix last year is the same thing that kind of hurt Michael Penix a little bit, is they played in the Pac-12, and nobody pays attention to those games. Sadly, they just don't get the eyes that other leagues do. Well, this year, he's going to be in a much different situation because he's going to be in the Big Ten. And so, yes, there's still going to be some games that are played, out in Pac-12 country, but it's going to be a situation where those games are going to just have a lot more eyes on them. So, for example, this year they play a game at home against Ohio State. That's probably going to be a normal night game. I'm not going to play that game at 10-something night. It's probably going to be like a 3:30 kickoff there or 4:30 kickoff there. That's a 7:30 kickoff here, or Eastern time, and there's going to be a lot of eyes on that. They got to play at Michigan. They got to play at Wisconsin. So the schedule has a couple of the big marquee games that are going to get eyes on them. At Michigan, home against Ohio State, Washington, maybe at Wisconsin, depending on how good they are. But it also isn't a gauntlet. They don't play USC this year. They don't play Penn State this year. And so I think the schedule's going to be challenging, but not too challenging that they can't be a 10-11 win team, and he puts up a lot of numbers if he can stay healthy, because that's just the system that he plays in. Do I think Dillon Gabriel is one of the best quarterbacks in college football? No. Do I think he is a veteran kid that's smart and can put up a lot of yards? Sure. But I just, I just see a guy that has all the ingredients to be a Heisman contender. And that's what it comes down to. And, he's got to stay healthy. That's going to be the big thing. He's got to stay healthy. Here's my other Heisman contenders in the Big Ten. I have 2 kids at Ohio State. And it's funny, I saw something yesterday, and it was, I don't know who it was from. And they had the Heisman Trophy odds for the Big Ten. And I think they had Will Howard number 2, which I think is nuts. And then the next highest Ohio State player was Quinshon Judkins. Maybe he does. Here's the deal with him. The 2 guys for me that I think have legit Heisman Trophy potential, I don't think Quinshon Judkins is one. I don't know that he's a guy that is just Is a guy going to really win a Heisman Trophy averaging 5 yards a carry? Because that'd be an improvement. 5 yards would be an improvement for Quinshon Judkins compared to last year. I mean, this is a guy that averaged sub 5 yards per carry in an air raid offense. That is not good. Now, yes, he rushed for a lot of yards. He rushed for 1,100 yards last year, and that's fine, 15 touchdowns, because he ran for over 300 yards against one team. Actually, no, that was actually not him specifically. Let me look at his production. He ran for 177 yards against LSU's terrible defense. He ran for 124 against Auburn, 124 against Vanderbilt. And, just you look at it and you're like, okay, those are bad teams. Averaged 3.4 per carry against Georgia, 3.6 against Louisiana Monroe, 3.1 in the bowl game. Oh, he ran for 106 yards against Penn State. He had 34 carries. He averaged 4.3 in the Egg Bowl. He averaged 2.9 against Georgia Tech. He averaged 2.7 against Tulane, 4.3 against Bama. So I don't see that. I mean, I know he had a very good freshman year, and I liked Quinshon coming out of high school. But I just don't see a guy that, to me, is going to be that type of player. I think the guy that has a chance, if he can be healthy, to be a legitimate Heisman Trophy contender for Ohio State there's two guys that need to stay healthy, but one is Travion Henderson. I think Travion actually is the guy that if Ohio State's going to have a Heisman contender this year, it's going to be him. It's going to be Travion. And so when I look at him, I see a guy that's got home run ability. I see a guy that has the ability to go out and say, hey, he could average 6.5, 7 yards a carry, doesn't need the bulk that Quinshon is going to need to get yards, could go out there and have 12 carries and have 130 yards because he rips off a 60-yarder. He's a guy that's going to make more plays in the pass game. I think if anybody breaks out for Ohio State, because I think Ohio State is going to be a very good team this year, but to me, I think it's going to be more of an accumulation of the talent of the team as opposed to like one star player. But if they do have one, I don't think it'll be Will Howard. I don't think it'll be Quinshon Judkins. I think it'll be Travion Henderson. But he's got to stay healthy. That's the big thing for him. He's got to stay healthy. But he's going to play in marquee games. The offensive line should be better. I think that they're not going to be a great offensive line, but that system doesn't need them to be a great offensive line. They just got to do their job. And he also, as part of a rotation, to me, is a guy that I thought can be if Quinshon's getting 15 to 16 carries a game and Travion's getting 11, 12 carries a game, Travion's going to be able to do a lot more with it. And he's going to be able to get a lot more production with that sort of split. And so when again, this past year, even banged up, this was his down year. He missed 3 games this year, still ran for 926 yards and 5.9 yards per carry, had 11 touchdowns, even in a banged up year. And then you look at his freshman year, 1,255 yards, 6.8 yards per carry, 15 touchdowns. And he did that on fewer carries, and I see a guy that can do more with less. When you look at Quinshon Judkins, he's more of a guy that needs bulk. He's more of a guy that needs the carries. If you look at the number of carries he's had in all his 100-yard games, it's 33, 21, 17. That was against Vanderbilt. 23, 28. And he only had 102 yards in that game. 34, 10 against Central Arkansas. 27, 25, 25, 34, 25, and 24. If you look at the number of carries that Travion had in his 100-yard games in his career, it's 24, and he had 277 yards. 28, he had 152, 16, 21, 19, 14, 24, 22, and 15. He's just a guy that, to me, gets a lot more with less. And I think he's going to have the really impact plays that you need to be that kind of guy. And then the other guy that's a little bit of a dark horse for me is a Micah Gilbert. I don't know what direction that Chip Kelly's offense is going to take at Ohio State. The personnel is different than what he had at UCLA. So does he go out and say, hey, look, we're going to be more balanced. We're going to throw the ball more. I don't know. I think Micah Gilbert is a guy that could go out there and catch 90 balls this year. I really do. I think depending on how Chip evolves the offense and what happens to quarterback, I could see a scenario where you have a guy like Micah Gilbert breaks out as a big-time receiver. I think those two guys, to me, have a better chance of being a Heisman player for Ohio State than Will Howard or Quinshon Judkins. That's just my take. I do think Penn State has a chance to have a Heisman Trophy contender. I just don't think it is going to be Drew Aller. I think Drew Aller's better than some people think. He's not a Heisman player. He's not. He's just not that kind of guy. At least he hasn't shown to be yet. I think the guy that can have the breakout year for Penn State and have a monster year is Nicholas Singleton. When I think about Nick Singleton in Chris Kaepernick's offense, like, you start getting excited. I mean, look at what he did with the Neal kid at Kansas this past year. And this is a team that doesn't have the talent that Penn State's going to have anywhere. And then they had Jalen Daniels hurt. But last year, Devin Neal rushed for 1,280 yards, averaged 6.3 yards per carry, and had 16 rushing touchdowns last season. And Kansas last year went out and averaged 206 rushing yards per game, 5.4 yards per carry. They averaged 183.5 the year before. Devin Neal averaged it ran for 1,090 yards the year before, 6.1 yards per carry, 9 touchdowns. So over the last 2 years, this kid has rushed for over 2,300 yards. He's had 25 touchdowns, and he's had only 180 and 203 yard carries. So last year, you remember when I was going through like all the big carries games that Quinshon Judkins had? Last year, Devin Neal ran for over 100 yards 6 times. And he only went over 20 carries in 2 of those games, 25 against Oklahoma. No, I'm sorry, only 1 of those games. Here's the number of carries he had in his 100-yard games: 10 against Illinois, 12 against UCF, 25 against Oklahoma, 19 against Texas Tech, 18 against K-State, 10 against Cincinnati. He had 2 games he had 10 carries. Then you look at the year before, 4 carries, 108 yards, 32, but he went for 224, 24, but he went for $190 in those games. And then his freshman year, he had 3 games over 100 yards too. A little bit more volume in those games. Last 2 years, he wasn't. And he's not nearly as explosive, in my opinion, as what Nicholas Singleton is. Now, Nicholas Singleton is coming off a down year. He wasn't even Penn State's leading rusher last year. Katron Lee was. But I just feel like in this system, Nicholas Singleton's going to have a bounce-back year. There's a lot of pressure on him last year. He didn't seem healthy to me. As a freshman, he ran for 6.8 yards per carry, 12 touchdowns. Had 1,061 yards. This year only averaged 4.4 yards per carry. I think put on a little bit too much weight. He looked a little banged up to me. And he's also – but here's the thing about Nicholas Singleton, though. He had a down year running the football, only 752 yards. But he had 26 catches for 308 yards, and he also had 13 kick returns. Now, if they continue to have him returning kicks this year, I think that's something that is going to be good for him because that allows him to get even more yards in different ways. So that could certainly help him too. But when I see Nicholas Singleton, I think the kid's got a chance to be a star. And then you look at his ability as a pass catcher. Last year, Devin Neal for Kansas caught 25 balls for 217 yards. I think Nicholas Singleton will definitely get more than that this season. So I just see a kid that's got big-time ability. I see a kid that started to look healthier at the end of the year and started to play better. But I think back to the freshman year kid that went on the road against Auburn and had 124 yards on 10 carries, had 179 yards and 10 carries in another game, had 122 yards in a Big Ten game on 11 carries, ran for 120 yards against Utah on 7 carries. So I see a kid that's got big-time ability. Just was banged up last year. The new system he's in is going to be way better for him. Way better for him. And if Drew Aller can give him any support, like if Drew can just be a good player this year, then, man, I think he's got a chance to be really, really dynamic and could be a Heisman contender if Penn State can win enough games. But if he's putting up the yards, then that's going to make Penn State very dangerous. And I could see that happening. Big 12, the only Heisman Trophy contender I see in the Big 12 is Ollie Gordon. And so, obviously was one of the nation's leading rushers last year. So, of course, you're going to have him. Actually, did he lead he was second in the nation. No, second in yards per game. He led the nation in rushing yards. With 1,732 yards, 21 touchdowns. The reason I don't want to spend a lot of time on Ollie Gordon is he's going to put up big numbers, but he just kind of shows that it's about who you play for. Guys, I'll ask you this. If Alabama had a running back last year that ran for 1,732 yards and 21 touchdowns, do you think he would have been a top 5 Heisman Trophy vote getter? I believe he would have. Because he's a guy that, it'd be more spotlight on him. So I just think the fact that he's at Oklahoma State and now they don't even get Texas and Oklahoma's games anymore, I think it's going to make it very hard for those guys to be Heisman Trophy contenders. And so, a couple sleeper picks. I think there's one sleeper pick for me in the Big 12. That's Avery Johnson. I am not ready to make him a real contender. I'm just saying keep an eye on him for this year because I could see him putting up he's going to have highlight reel plays. He's going to be really fun to watch. What kind of numbers is he going to put up? I don't know, but I could see him being a guy that makes a little bit of noise if things kind of go well, but he's probably more of 2025. We'll be having more talks about Avery Johnson, but he's a guy to keep an eye on when you talk about some of the national Heisman Trophy contenders. I'm not going to do ACC because I don't see a lot of ACC Heisman Trophy contenders, and the couple that may be there are guys that Notre Dame is going to play this year. So we'll talk about them in the next section of this show. So we're going to talk about Notre Dame Heisman contenders and then Notre Dame opponent Heisman contenders next. Before we do, folks, do me a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review, and sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So final section of the show, we're going to talk about Notre Dame and Notre Dame's opponents when it comes to Heisman Trophy contenders. And where does this conversation start off with? It starts off with Riley Leonard. And I think that's a given. Now, I've said before, do I think Riley Leonard could be a Heisman contender? Yes. Am I putting him in my top 5 right now? No, maybe top 10. And the reason why is there's still a lot we have to learn and about Riley Leonard. You guys know my opinion on Riley Leonard. I think he's an extremely gifted player. I think he's got a lot of arm talent. He's a dynamic athlete. And I've pointed out in past shows, I'm not going to rehash it, that his numbers at Duke in 2022 were every bit as good, if not better, than what Jalen Milroe had last year at Alabama. And Jalen Milroe finished 6th, I believe, in Heisman Trophy voting. And Riley Leonard wasn't even in the top 10 the year before. And so, I see a guy that's got a lot of ability and a guy that can be an impact player and a guy that be a difference maker. However, if we're being honest as Notre Dame fans, we also have to say this guy's coming off of a lower body injury. We don't know how healthy he's going to be all season. He's cleared now. He's good to go now, but can he stay healthy? Question number 1. How's he going to adjust to the new system? Question number 2. How's he going to adjust to the new players around him? Question number 3. And then also he's a guy that, in my opinion, has to show that he can play well on the biggest stage. I think that's a very fair question. Now, I think he's capable of doing all those things, but he's got to show a lot for me. And so I need to see it from him. And somebody in the chat said, he's a good bet. I mean, okay. I mean, you can bet on it. I'm not doing betting odds. I'm saying, who are the guys that I look at and say they're going to be the contenders? And for me, if I'm being honest, I just need to see Riley do it first at Notre Dame. That's going to be a big key because we have to be able to look at it and say, you guys know I'm someone who's very much on the Riley Leonard hype train as a player and the impact he's going to have at Notre Dame. But when we talk about Heisman Trophy winner, there's a lot he's going to have to show me. And we haven't seen a lot of transfers go in there and win Heismans in first year. A lot of the transfers that have won Heismans are guys that were there multiple years. We talk about Michael Penix. He didn't win it, but I think he finished 2nd or 3rd. But he was in year 2 at Washington. Bo Nix was in year 2 at Oregon. Joe Burrow won his in year 2 at LSU. Kyler Murray won his in year 3 at Oklahoma. Baker Mayfield won his, I believe, in year 3 at Oklahoma. So a lot of the highs, we haven't seen, in my opinion, we haven't seen really guys go out there and have a ton of success winning the Heisman Trophy and be in their first season at a school. We just haven't seen that. We haven't seen that quite as much as we have in the past. And so I look at it, and Jaden Daniels is a guy that won it as a transfer. He was in his 2nd year at LSU. Again, none of them in their first years. We've seen a lot of transfers win the Heisman. Jaden Daniels won the Heisman Trophy. Joe Burrow won the Heisman Trophy. Kyler Murray won the Heisman Trophy. Baker Mayfield won the Heisman Trophy. But a lot of those guys were winning it when they were in 2nd or 3rd seasons at those schools. I'm going to pull up the Heisman Trophy now. I don't know that a guy has won it in his first year to school. So Caleb Williams is the only one that won it in his first year at school. But Caleb Williams was playing in the same system. He followed the coach from Oklahoma to USC. So that was his first year. So that's one example. Different situation than Notre Dame's because he followed the coach. Bryce Young was not a transfer. Joe Burrow was a transfer, year 2 starter at LSU. Kyler Murray won it. He transferred from Texas A&M. He was there 2 or 3 years. Baker Mayfield multiple seasons after transferring in to Oklahoma. Lamar Jackson was not a transfer. Marcus Mariota was not a transfer. Jameis Winston, Johnny Manziel, Robert Griffin, Cam Newton, all the way back to 2010, transferred from a JUCO. So he's an example. They're not often. Sam Bradford wasn't a transfer. Tim Tebow, Troy Smith, Matt Leinart, Jason White, Carson Palmer, Chris Winkie, I guess, transferred in from Major League Baseball. There aren't a lot of guys that have gone and been able to have success in year 1. It's not unheard of, but those guys are a bit unicornish, or their circumstances are a little bit different. Riley's just not in that category. So for me, I just need to see him prove some things if I'm going to say he's a legit Heisman contender, like somebody can win it. So that's the downside. But I also think it's something that can happen. And here's why I say that. Number one, as I said, he's very gifted. He's a very talented player. He's got a lot of ability, a lot of talent. He's a guy that can be an impact player. I think he can pass for well over 3,000 yards this year. I think he's a guy that can run for 500 yards. I think he's a guy that can count for well over 30 touchdowns. I think he certainly can put up production, at least get some recognized. I would be shocked and disappointed if he doesn't produce more than, let's say passing-wise than what Jalen Milroe did last year or what Riley did in 2022. I certainly think the passing production is going to be better. He's going to have a much better supporting cast, a system that's designed to throw the football. I mean, heck, I think Riley Leonard's a better quarterback than Desmond Ridder, and Desmond Ridder put up very good numbers with Mike Denbrock at Cincinnati. Now, again, the competition was a little bit different. But Desmond Ridder in 2021 passed for 3,300 yards, 30 touchdowns, and 8 picks that season. When you look at the year before, Desmond Ridder, and in that year he also rushed for 355 yards and 6 more touchdowns. In 2020, his junior year, passed for that was a little different because they played fewer games that season, so it's hard to count that. But he passed for 2,296 yards in only 10 games because of the COVID year, and then rushed for 592 yards and 12 touchdowns. So 31 touchdowns in only 10 games. And so you saw a guy that was able to go out and put up production. We saw what Jaden Daniels did this past year. We saw what Deshaun Kaiser did in 2018 and the production that he had. So I think there's opportunities for him to have much better production than what he had. The question is he going to be able to use his legs as much, as effectively as he did? If he does, then I think his numbers are going to be very, very good. I think Riley, the supporting cast around Riley is going to matter. But here's the other thing, too. When you talk about the ingredients for Heisman winning a Heisman Trophy, number one, you got to be the quarterback on one of the best teams in college football. Well, if Riley Leonard's putting up big numbers, or even just pretty good numbers, Notre Dame's going to win a lot of games. So that's number one. So he'll be and they're going to start highly ranked. So he's not going to be like flying under the radar in the first, month of the season on a team that nobody expected to be good, like maybe the 2012 Notre Dame team that began the year unranked. So he's going to be able to, be in the spotlight, starting quarterback on a big-time team. You got to put up numbers. I think he'll put up numbers. And then you got to play well in big games. And you have to have big game opportunities. Well, I think Riley has that. I mean, they're going to be the primetime game in week 1 against A&M. They're going to play against a Louisville team I think is going to be pretty good. They're going to have to play against a Florida State team that I think is going to be pretty good. And then they're going to end the season at USC, which is going to be a spotlight game. So he'll have plenty of opportunities to have some spotlight games, but they also don't play defenses that a whole lot of really filthy defenses this year, which I think should help the offense a lot as well. So I do believe Riley Leonard has the tools to be a Heisman Trophy contender. I do. What I'm saying, what I said at the beginning is these are things that have concerns that make me not put him on my list today. So if I were to say, okay, I'm projecting Heisman Trophy winners, here's my top 5. Riley Leonard is not on that list because I have too many things I need to see. If I were to say, okay, but if you could tell me he's going to be healthy for 12 games of the regular season, would he be in your top 5 at the end of the year? I'd say yes. I do believe he'll have a chance to be there and be that kind of player. And Notre Dame's going to need him to be that kind of player, to be honest with you. But he's not the only guy. There's one other player that I could see as sort of a dark horse Heisman Trophy contender, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on him because it's way too early for that. He's got a lot to prove. But you can't ignore Jeremiah Love's talent and the way he's going to be used this year. You can't. I mean, look, he's going to be a home run threat. He's going to run the ball. He's going to have a lot of rushing yards. He's going to have receiving yards. If Notre Dame's blowing teams out, or if the offensive line's better than we think, I could see a guy like Jeremiah Love maybe having that kind of big year. I don't see it. I'm not predicting it for two reasons. One, I think he's going to split carries too much with Jadarian Price. Not too much to win games. I love the 1-2 punch, but more of doing it for Heisman aspects of it. And then the other part is I think the quarterback's going to take some of those rushing yards away as well, and Riley Leonard. But he'd be my dark horse guy, and he could be someone. And especially if he gets some chances to maybe return kicks this year, return punts or kicks, I could see it there as well. But those are the two guys that I look at and say, I think those two players from Notre Dame have the best chance to be in there. There was actually one ACC player that I did not put in my dark horse category, sleeper category, that I meant to put in there, and that's Damian Martinez from Miami. Because if Miami's really good this year, I don't think it's going to be because Cam Ward's lights out. I think it's because Damian Martinez running behind that big old offensive line. They have a shot. They got a really good O-line coach in Alex Maribel. They had 3 young kids starting last year. They're all back. That offensive line could potentially be really good. It's big, and they like to run the ball. But so if Shannon Dawson can kind of figure out how to use Damian Martinez at Miami, Mario Cristobal wants to run it. I could see him going out there and having a really big year. And if Miami is a 10-plus win team, I could see Damian Martinez getting some love. I could see him being a 1,500-plus yard rusher, 15-plus touchdowns, and being an impact player. Now, he's got to keep his head on straight, obviously, but the talent's there. And if he has a better team around him, he could put up some big numbers. So I did forget to do that. Now let's look at Notre Dame's opponents and who are some teams that could potentially be somebody said in the thing about BC and UVA, like the reality is you're not going to have Heisman Trophy contenders on teams that stink. So there's a lot of guys that maybe talent-wise and stats-wise could be in there, but that's not realistic because no one from Memphis, like Seth Hannigan, could put up monster numbers this year. Nobody from Memphis is winning a Heisman Trophy. Preston Sohn could put up monster numbers in the ACC this year for SMU. No kid from SMU is winning the Heisman Trophy. It's just not going to happen. Not this year. But and you look at Notre Dame's opponents, there aren't a lot of Heisman Trophy contenders, in my opinion. And this is something that's interesting about Notre Dame's schedule. A couple guys to consider. Obviously, Connor Wegman at Texas A&M is getting a lot of preseason love. He's a guy that he's got to prove he can stay healthy. That's the big thing for Connor Wegman. But for those of you who follow, my opinions on high school recruiting, you remember that I was very high on him coming out of high school. I think he's a very talented player. And I also think he's a pretty good fit for what Colin Klein likes to do. They didn't use him a lot as a runner at Texas A&M. I think that was a mistake. I think he's a pretty good dual threat type quarterback. He's a kid that's got a lot of ability as a thrower. He could maybe have a dark horse season. And the reason I put him in there is they'd have to beat Notre Dame in the opener and he'd have to play really well, or losing a barn burner to Notre Dame in which he puts up huge numbers and then they kind of go on a roll and thrive and do really well there. They're players that I look at and say, hey, could he go out and put up really big numbers and be sure it's possible. He's a bit of a dark horse. Haynes King from Alabama or from Georgia Tech's another guy. He's a guy that to me is going to have some marquee games. If they go out and win 9 games this year, he's got to play Notre Dame. They got to play Florida State. They got to play Georgia. I can see them putting up big numbers and have a lot of success in that regard. But he's got to cut way down the turnovers. And I just don't think Georgia Tech's going to be a good enough team for him to have a chance to compete. And then another dark horse guy that's not an offensive player is if Florida State's a ACC champ, beats Notre Dame, top 5 team, I actually don't think the guy that's going to get most of the praise for that team is going to be a guy on offense. I don't think it's going to be DJ Uiagalelei. I think it's going to be more of one of their defensive players. And there's a guy on their team that I would like a lot, Patrick Payton, who's coming back next year. He had 44 tackles last year, 14.5 tackles for loss, 7 sacks as a sophomore last year. As a freshman in 2022, he had 6 tackles for loss and 5 sacks. Very talented player. He had this, obviously, you had Jared Verse there last year, kind of taking some of that production away. Verse had 12.5 tackles for loss last year. and Verse had 9 sacks. I think this kid's going to be a pass rushing force. He's going to have some help. They got Marvin Jones transferred in from Georgia. So they're going to have a really good 1-2 punch on the edge. Potentially the best D-line that Notre Dame's going to face this year. I know a lot of people, talk about A&M. I actually think Florida State right now, in my opinion, has the best D-line that they're going to face this year. And he could be a guy that goes out there and has like a 20 tackle for loss, 13, 14 sack type of season. I could certainly see that. And then, maybe DJ Uiagalelei, and then whoever the quarterback is at USC. If it's Miller Moss, I could see it. If it's Jalen, if it's Jaden, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, the kid that transferred from UNLV, I could see. I mean, those guys are going to put up numbers. There's no doubt about it. Whoever USC starting quarterback is going to put up numbers. The big concern with USC is, are they going to be a good enough team? The thing that works for them, for USC, is they're going to play a ton of spotlight games this year. I mean, USC's schedule is such that if they're a 10-plus win team, let's just say USC goes 10-2. That's not normally the record for a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, but last year's Heisman Trophy winner went 9-3, and he put up monster numbers. But they got LSU, they play at Michigan, home against Wisconsin, home against Penn State, at Washington, home against Notre Dame. They also play home against Nebraska, and then home against Notre Dame. That's a lot of potential spotlight games this year for that football team. And so they're a team that is gonna, if they're a 10-2 team, that means their quarterback play was very good. The system by itself is going to put up a lot of numbers. And so USC's quarterback, whoever it is, if they're good, is going to be a big reason why, statistically. Now, I think the biggest reason why is DeAnton Lynn and what he's going to do with defense. If USC's 10-2 this year, it won't be because the offense is better. The offense was statistically very good. It's going to be because the defense is way better. But the defense being way better, making them a better team, means now the stats that you are putting up on offense anyway are going to get viewed in a more favorable light than what Caleb Williams got last year. So, I mean, people act like Caleb Williams was terrible last year. And I like, where did he finish? Let me go look at the Heisman Trophy voting last season and see where Caleb Williams was last year. So he wasn't even in the top 10 last year. Caleb Williams last season passed for 3,633 yards, 9.4 yards per attempt, had 30 touchdown passes and only 5 picks, and he ran for 11 touchdowns. He had 41 total touchdowns last season, had over 3,700 yards in the regular season, and did not even finish in the top 10 of Heisman Trophy voting last year. Jordan Travis last year for Florida State, who passed for 2,700 yards and only ran for 176 yards, so didn't even get to 3,000 yards of offense, only had 27 touchdowns last year. He finished 5th in Heisman Trophy voting last season. Jalen Milroe had less than about 3,500 total yards of offense, about 35 touchdowns last year, less yards, less touchdowns than Caleb Williams, and he finished 6th. And J.J. McCarthy, who passed for under 3,000 yards last year and didn't come close to the numbers that Caleb Williams put up, finished 10th. Caleb wasn't even top 10. Why? His team sucked. That's why. And because the perception was he was supposed to be great. Well, this year, there's not the same expectation for the USC quarterback. So if the numbers are anywhere close to what it was last year, and I think it'll be better because the team will be better, and then you've got a defense and what I think DeAnton Lynn is going to do and all the transfers coming in, and we'll break USC down later, that's going to make USC a better team. They're going to have tons of spotlight games, and their quarterback's going to produce. So whoever the quarterback is at USC will be a guy that's a contender for that. Couple questions that were posed about, people not on the list. Number one, I don't have anybody from Colorado on the list because number one, Shedeur Sanders is not that good of a player, in my opinion. He's not a Heisman contending player. Travis Hunter, you could maybe make a case for, but again, let's be honest. You're not going to have a guy that's not a quarterback on a bad team win the Heisman. You're just not. He'll be a great story. He'll be a first-team All-American if he's a great player. People will talk about him. He maybe might finish in the top 10 in Heisman voting. I think he probably would if he's that good of a player. But there's no way that a player on a bad team like what I expect Colorado to be is going to win a Heisman Trophy. I don't care how good he is. And this isn't saying that that's right. That's just the reality. I mean, name me a Heisman Trophy winner on a bad team. It's been a long time since that was the case. That's just not the reality. So none of the Colorado guys are going to be on there because they're just not going to be a very good team. Somebody asked about Noah Fafiti. Two things about him. Number one, I don't think Arizona is going to be as good as they were last year. Number one. Number two, he has no value as a rusher. At least he didn't last year. And I don't think his numbers are going to be good enough to be a Heisman contender without any rushing. And also, teams are going to have more film on him now. And he's playing in a different system. So he's not in the same system he was last year. So I'm not super high on him as a Heisman Trophy contender this year. So he's not a guy that I would be in there too. And I know a lot of people like Arizona to win the Big 12. I don't see it. I think they're maybe an 8-9 win team. So, and Robert Bishop said Notre Dame had a Heisman winner on a bad team. As I said, it's been a long time. Who was that Heisman Trophy winner? It's Paul Hornung back in the 50s, I believe, correct? 50s or 60s? So that proves my point. It's been a long time. And the Heisman Trophy voting today is not what it was 50, 60 years ago. It's a different animal. And so you're just not going to have that. So when I look at real Heisman Trophy contenders, people that have a shot to win it, you're just not going to see a team with a losing record win it. And the only way it would happen is if the numbers were just insanely good. And I don't think that Travis Hunter, even as a two-way player, is going to be able to have good enough numbers to do that, in my opinion. Because I think they're going to have to take away from one of those two. If he's going to be like a 1,300-yard receiver, let's just say, for example, you can't keep playing him on defense as much as you did. He won't last. He's too small. He won't last. If you want him to be like the Charles Woodson type impact player on defense, then you can't have him play enough on offense to have the kind of numbers to make it matter. That's kind of where I'm at. So you look at Cam Rising. I'm not a big fan of Cam Rising. So that's not one for me. I'm not a big fan of them. I don't think they're going to be a very good team. Somebody mentioned Barry Sanders. Buddy, Oklahoma State went 11-2 or 10-2 in Barry Sanders this year. They finished 11th in the country. So that's not a good example of someone who wasn't good who was on a bad team. So I don't see that one. But yeah, I'm not high on Cam Rising. I don't think he's going to have the production. I think Utah's going to be good, but I don't know. Like a guy, let's be honest here. Perception matters in Heisman voting. A guy at Utah to win it is going to have like a monster season. So I think Archer just said it. Like, why did Lamar win it at Louisville? Because he had an insane season. Like, that's why Lamar Jackson won the Heisman Trophy. He had an insanely good season in 2016 when he won the Heisman Trophy, because you normally don't see guys win it at a place like Louisville unless they have crazy numbers. And he had crazy numbers. He threw for 3,500 yards and 30 touchdowns, and he ran for 1,571 yards and 21 touchdowns. So he had insanely good production that year. And so I just don't see anybody kind of putting up those kind of numbers, in my opinion. So, and then when you look at Deshaun or Lamar Jackson, he wasn't even necessarily the runaway Heisman Trophy winner. He won by a good amount, but his win was less in 2016 than the win the next year that Baker Mayfield had over Bryce Love. And Lamar finished third that year. Well, why did Lamar finish third in 2017? Lamar was pretty flipping good in 2017. He was a better passer in 2017. He rushed for more yards in 2017. So Lamar Jackson wins the Heisman Trophy in 2016. He doesn't win it in 2017. In 2017, he finishes third, way out of it. He had a higher completion percentage. He had a similar touchdown number. He's slightly fewer touchdowns, but he's had 45 touchdowns compared to 51 the year before. His quarterback rating was almost the same, and he rushed for more yards and averaged almost a full yard more yards per carry in 2016 than he did in 2017. So why didn't he win it in 2017? Because his team wasn't as good. I mean, that's the reality. His team wasn't as good. They were an 8-5 team that year. The previous year, they were a better football team. They just were. They're a better football team. They finished the year 9-3, lost their last two games, and the game to Kentucky was pretty close. And so Lamar went out and put up monster numbers. And then the next year, they were 4-3 at one point in time, 5-4 at one point in time before winning their last three games. So the perception of Lamar was very different. Why? His team wasn't as good. Even though the production was yards-wise was better, yards per play-wise was better, Touchdowns slightly less, interceptions about the same. So why didn't he win it? Well, expectations, number one, but then number two, it was his team wasn't very good. So if Lamar Jackson couldn't win it, if Lamar Jackson couldn't win a Heisman Trophy, throwing for 3,600 yards and rushing for 1,600 yards, Shedeur Sanders isn't going to sniff the Heisman Trophy, nor should he. First of all, because he's not that good of a player, not like that. But he's not going to sniff it. If 8-5 Louisville couldn't do it with the reigning Heisman Trophy winner, then it's not going to. Same thing with Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams was a very good player last year. He sucked against Notre Dame, but he was very good last year. Well, didn't even finish in the top 10. Why? His team sucked. That's just the reality of it. Just, so you have to have a pretty good team to make that happen. So, yeah. So that's where I'm at for Heisman Trophy winning. So that's my list. Let's go on the message board, talk about it some more. You guys can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Who are your top Heisman contenders for this season? Who are you guys that think are legitimate Heisman Trophy contenders? And we'll kind of go off from there. So actually, let's. There's one other one that I think Robert Griffin won the Heisman in what year? 2012, right? Is when he won or 2011, right? So somebody just said they weren't a good football team. Again, you guys got to work on your memory a little bit. 2011, Baylor went 10-3 and finished the year ranked 13th. They lost to number 3 Oklahoma State, number 21 Texas A&M, lost to Kansas State by a point. They also beat a ranked TCU team. They beat number 5 Oklahoma that year and beat number 22 Texas by 3 touchdowns. So Baylor was a pretty good football team that year. So yeah. So again, you don't see that very often. You don't see guys on. It's been a long time. Actually, let's go look at Heisman Trophy winners. So since some of you still think that you can remember the last time a guy on a not very good team won the Heisman Trophy won a Heisman Trophy. So let's go back and see. So last year's Heisman Trophy winner won 10 games. Year before, they won 11. Year before that, they won 11. Year before that, national title. Year before that, national title. Year before that, playoff team. 17 playoff team. 16, Lamar, won 9 games. Derrick Henry, national champions. Marcus Mariota, national runners-up. Jameis Winston, national title. Johnny Manziel, I think they won 11, 12 games that year. Robert Griffin won 10 games. Cam Newton, national title. Mark Ingram, national title. Sam Bradford played for the title. Tim Tebow, they won 9 games. Troy Smith played for the national championship. Reggie Bush played for the national championship. Matt Leinart won a title. Jason White, national runners-up. Carson Palmer. I think that USC team wasn't great. I still think they were a 9-10 win team. Well, they won 11 games, so I was wrong on that. Eric Crouch, Nebraska, 21. I believe they were national runners-up. Chris Wenke, national runners-up. Ron Dane for Wisconsin in 1999. That was a 10-2 team that finished in the top 5 nationally. Ricky Williams at Texas in 1998. That was a Texas team that I believe was a top 10 team that year. Let me look that up. Yep, 9-3. Actually, not 10. 9-3. Finished ranked 15th that season. So that's one of the quote-unquote down years of a Heisman Trophy winner. Charles Woodson, national titles. Danny Warfel, national title. Eddie George, top 5 team. Rashawn Salam in 1994. That Colorado team finished number 3 in the country. 1992, Gino Toretto played for the title. Desmond Howard, Michigan in 1991. That was a top 10 team, finished the year number 6. So Ty Detmer in 1990 for BYU. That team went 10-3, finished in the top 25. I mean, that's literally the worst since 1990. The last time that you had a team that wasn't a top 15 to 20 team was 1990 with Ty Detmer, and he threw for insane yards. Actually, it's kind of funny. The last time that there was a Heisman Trophy, winner for a team that won fewer than 9 games, you guys know who it was? I'm going to do a little trivia question here. Do you all know the last Heisman Trophy winner to win a title or win the Heisman for a team that won less than 9 games? Do you guys know who it was? I'm going to give you guys a couple seconds because I know there's a little bit of delay. See who can name the last time there was a Heisman Trophy winner for a team that won fewer than 9 games. Raymond Horton nailed it. Tim Brown, University of Notre Dame. They were 8-3 in the regular season, won the title, and went there. Somebody said Baylor was 9-3. They were still a top 20, top 15 team. That was not a bad football team. So bad example, very bad example, because they were top 15, 20 team. The last time a Heisman Trophy winner won it with less than 9 wins in a season, regular season, whatever, was Tim Brown back in 1987. So the last time a guy won a Heisman on a team that wasn't very good, that won 9 games or less, Ryan, my employee, was years away from being born. So, yeah, you got to be on a pretty good team to win the Heisman Trophy. You got to be on at least a top 15 caliber team. So, hey, Raymond, you already got a mug. I'll hook you up, though. Don't worry, Raymond. I'll hook you up. So you nailed that one. So you got that right. So that's kind of interesting to look back at that. But and Michael, yes, I know Paul Horning's team was worse, but I don't really – you're not going to use data that's going to be convincing me that happened 20 years before I was born. So we're not going to go there. So, yeah, you got to be pretty good to win a Heisman Trophy. So that's a fun Heisman Trophy conversation. I enjoyed it. I hope you guys enjoyed it very much. If you want to ask further questions or dive more into Heisman Trophy conversations, I would love to hear your guys' thoughts. Why don't somebody go start a thread on the message board and say, hey, who are your predictions? Who are your top 10 Heisman Trophy contenders for this season? And I'd be curious to hear what you guys think and have some fun talking about that on the message board at boards.oursbreakdown.com. So, folks, I'm on my way out of here now. Hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate that. And if you're not on the message board, you're missing out. Go to boards.oursbreakdown.com. If you sign up for an annual membership, monthly membership, you do get a discount to the IB store. If you sign up for the Shamrock or the Blue Club, you get not only do you get a discount, 20% discount on any purchase of the IB store, but you also get a free IB Club mug. And if you join the Gold Club, again, you're not doing it for these perks because you can just buy them from the store. It's a way that you can support Irish Breakdown above and beyond what just kind of can otherwise do. But then this is also our thank you to say, hey, thanks for supporting us the way that you do. You get an IB Club mug and an IB Gold Club t-shirt. So you can definitely check that out at boards.irishbreakdown.com. It's a very exclusive club. We only have about 140, 150 members of the club. But if you want to join it, you always can. And we would greatly appreciate your guys' support. We always appreciate your guys' support. And then that's just our little token, a little thank you, a token of our appreciation for your support. So you can find that at boards.oursbreakdown.com. So have an awesome rest of your day, everybody. And I will talk to you guys again tomorrow. It'll be me and Vince. We're going to have some fun tomorrow talking about Notre Dame's sophomore surge. And, of course, buy, sell, hold. So go ahead and check that out as well. We'll talk to you guys here very soon. Yes, Detro Hunter, join us. We are not a cult. We promise. It's awesome. It's a great way to end it, my man. I appreciate you. We'll talk to you guys all again very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.